Doctor Who Redacted is... Well, when's the last time Doctor Who had a spin-off?
2016, I suppose.
Yeah, on the TV, 2016 with Class during Peter Capaldi's era. But there's a new spin-off from the BBC in 2022, and it launched on the same day as Jodie Whittaker's Legend of the Sea Devils special. It's called Doctor Who Redacted. It's from the BBC, BBC Sounds. Jodie Whittaker herself features in some of it. It's a fully fledged spin-off, just on audio, not on your TV. But it's not Big Finish like we've reviewed on here before. No, it's not ran by Big Finish, that company that sold Doctor Who audio dramas for decades now. This is a whole new affair, a free affair, about 3 broke university dropouts from across the UK who keep in touch by doing a paranormal conspiracy podcast together, the Blue Box Files. Only a very real paranormal conspiracy starts to ensnare them over the story of the spin-off, as people keep disappearing both from the world and from everyone's memories. And this is all ran by, well, the head writer is Juno Dawson, and the director and producer is Ella Watts, and we'll talk more about both of them later. And doing all this talking today will be myself, Neo from Australia, along with my friends Oliver and Einar, both from England. So the way our discussion is going to work is the first half or so of it, this is all going to be chapter coded on YouTube, it'll be easy to tell where you are. The first half or so of it is going to be more general, not spoiling specific details from the episode so much, and then in the second half we'll get more into specific details from the episodes themselves. But to start off, we're going to have a more general conversation about what this spin-off is and what we think of that. So what did you two think when this spin-off first had its surprise announcement?
Oh, really exciting. I thought it was totally out of the blue. I think for everybody, I assume for you guys as well, and nobody had any sort of inkling that this was in the works or, you know, it was something that was coming our way, even though it had been sort of planned or kind of thought about and worked on since 2019. It was just a totally surprising announcement, but kind of really exciting. It felt like exactly the sort of thing that in a way should have been done earlier, which is not to, you know, criticize the people making it for only doing it now, but it sort of feels like something that kind of, if this era had something like that alongside Series 11, that would have been really cool. You know, you could have had kind of a podcast where the kind of characters were being interviewed and so on alongside that series. I don't know. But we're glad we got there at last anyway.
Yeah, Juno Dawson immediately jumped out at me as a really interesting person who I sort of wish had been writing for the show, but it was great to see her writing for something Doctor Who. The other side of it was that drama podcasts are very much the lowest rent form of spin-off because they don't get much attention. They're obviously very cheap to produce. There's some element of them being the easiest form of spin-off that hit me when it was announced as, oh yeah, we've gone from Torchwood to a podcast.
And that's very much something to do with who's commissioning the series, greenlighting the series, more so than our actual creatives making the series. But I see what you mean in that, the show, of course, used to have multiple spin-offs on the TV. Now it's a spin-off on audio. Great that there's a spin-off at all that we can talk about. But yeah, I see what you're saying. But in terms of the spin-off as we got it, I was curious how you guys actually listened to this, in the sense that, were you listening week to week as the episodes came out over the course of 10 weeks? Did you bundle some up together? Because for me, I listened to these all over one day, a few days after the finales aired just now. So I listened to them pretty packed together as a sequence, as a binge, as you know, some people are going to do. But I'm curious how you guys approached actually listening to these stories.
Yeah, I was week to week, mostly on the Sunday, the day of release, although sometimes I got behind and caught up later in the week. But yeah, generally kind of as you would watch a weekly series on TV. Yeah.
Yeah, basically week to week, but with lags and getting distracted. And because the episodes are so short, a lot of the time it was easier to let a few stack together and then listen to them all at once.
Yeah, that's good that we have a different experience of it, because listening to them all in a row was pretty interesting as well. I'm interested how our experiences might have differed. But anyway, so we didn't know Doctor Who Redacted was coming. It kind of came out of nowhere for us, but it, like Einar mentioned, this had been kind of stirring for quite a while. The show is made by, the main writer is Juno Dawson, like we've said, who I know her from some Torchwood audio dramas she's done for Big Finish. One of them was an episode in the Series 5 audios they did, which I've discussed on here before, and it was an episode I really liked. It really stood out to me in that season. And she did another kind of Torchwood American spin-off one-off episode that I quite liked as well back in 2017. So I knew her from that, and she'd written a 13th Doctor book, and she's a novelist in her own right. So I was aware of her as a writer, and I like her as a writer. So I was excited when it was announced she was the one maining this spin-off. And it's also directed and produced by Ella Watts, who's some... Einar, do you know more about her than me?
Not really. I mean, I only in the sense of kind of having paid attention to some of the sort of interviews and so on, and behind the scenes details. But yeah, it sounds like she's... I think there's something about The Guardian describing her as the queen of audio fiction. So in the kind of UK terms, she's, within the sort of fairly, I guess, small pond of that sort of thing, she's quite a big fish now. She's kind of coming up and producing lots of stuff, and has written she wrote a sort of report about the whole industry-wide, a kind of an overview of the industry in, I think, 2018 it was. So she really knows the industry inside out, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I really like her in interviews. She's got a lot of really interesting stuff to say about audio, like she's an expert in, Doctor Who as well, all the kind of nature of what she's doing here with this spin-off. Yeah, really interesting person to listen to. So two people that really know what they're doing at the head of this, and it's a proper ambitious project. The episodes are small, but there are 10 of them released weekly, just like a spin-off you'd get on the telly, like the Sarah Jane Adventures or whatever back in the day. So this is it's a real tangible thing, which I think is so cool, and I was so excited by that, because like we were saying earlier, this would have been great in the gap years that have been plaguing, I suppose, this era for multiple reasons. It's hard to produce television now, especially not making it too hard on everyone, and COVID and everything just made that all the worse. But yeah, there's been a lot of gaps in this Chibnall era of Doctor Who. It would have been great to have spin-offs earlier as well, but hey, we got one at the end.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that where it's landed, because it's in this kind of liminal space almost of just at the very end of one era and almost at the beginning of the next one. I mean, okay, there is still one episode to go, and it could have been even more liminal if it had been this time next year, say. But I do think that's quite interesting, this way that and the way that it acts as a kind of fractal reflection of both the Chibnall era, but also maybe looking ahead to the next era around the corner. I think that's quite interesting.
On that sort of note, I was listening to an interview earlier where our head writer, Juno Dawson, was talking through the genesis of the project a bit, which is really quite interesting. So what had happened was...
Roll back to 2019. It was pre-pandemic, and Ella contacted, I think, my agent with the pitch, basically, which is kind of we would like to do an official Doctor Who podcast. It hadn't been done before. Now, bear in mind as well, none of us could have predicted that Russell T Davies was going to come back to Doctor Who. No. And so I was kind of I want to kind of take the vibe back to that Russell era. And I knew that Ella was a fan of the Russell era as well. So I figured she wouldn't take a lot of convincing. And so it became about kind of 3 queer working class women who have a podcast about the Doctor. And that hasn't really changed. So don't get me wrong, the scripts and the stories have evolved. But I think I wrote a very rough episode 1, 2, and 3, I think in 2019. They've very much changed since. And so we recorded the pilot. And I remember that was it. We were all at BBC Television Centre, I think, that one in West White City. And we were all lol, podcast about a virus. What about this weird virus that's on the news? Lol. And then, of course, 2020 happened. And I confess, very much like Charlie said, I thought that was going to be the end of it. I thought that between, during the pandemic, they struggled to get a series of Doctor Who made. Flux had to be a very different season of Doctor Who. And I think it was very difficult for everybody working on this show. And so I just sort of thought, between them trying to get a series filmed and the pandemic, I think Doctor Who Redacted is done. And then, having pretty much put it out of my mind, I think we got an email sort of back end of last year saying, BBC Sounds have greenlit all 10 episodes. Go. Like, please write the rest of the episodes really quickly. And I'm just, again, I mean, just very, very grateful that everybody was still available and still around. And we assembled the writers' room very quickly. And then we recorded this February for transmission in April. So
from Juno's perspective, in 2019, the director-producer Ella Watts hit her up to head the writing for a new Doctor Who podcast. There was that shared vibe of bringing it back to RTD1, his first era a bit. Remember, this was 2019, long before RTD was announced to actually return to head the show after Chibnall. Various things stalled out the project for a while, but then it had a crazy fast turnaround from being greenlit to being produced to being transmitted in early 2022. So then the perspective of the director-producer Ella Watts, who started the whole thing, is...
Back in 2019, the Doctor Who brand wanted a podcast, and they wanted something specifically to serve an audience that they felt that they were underserving, which was like young women under 35 and working class communities. And so they asked us to pitch podcasts like with those demographics like in mind, with those audiences in mind. I pitched Doctor Who Redacted as an audio drama that was like BuzzFeed Unsolved, but Doctor Who. And people liked that. And so then for about 6 months, I had a kind of 2 A4 page pitch document where I had like a picture of Shane and Ryan. And I was just like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And then eventually someone took me seriously enough that I had to find a writer, and I got Juno involved, and everything kind of expanded from there. Way back in 2019, right at the very start, when I had the first writers' room meeting with Juno Dawson and Sasha Sienna and Catherine Brinkworth, where we kind of worked out the initial plot of the series, I gave them a little spiel at the start where I was like, to be completely honest with you, I don't think it's likely we'll get this made. And that's for a couple of reasons. All of our main characters are women, and I'd already been told by like individuals in media that we would need a man to make it relatable. I was like, well, it's non-negotiable that these characters are queer, and that it's non-negotiable that we have a trans protagonist, and it's non-negotiable that that trans protagonist is played by a trans actor. But I knew that would make everything even more of a fight than doing an official Doctor Who audio drama for BBC Sounds as your first ever series commission would be. And so I kind of had to sit down with them and say, okay, this might not happen specifically because of what we're trying to do, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not worth doing if we don't do this.
It was very difficult because she had a few things she wouldn't compromise on, particularly in three women being the leads, a trans woman being the kind of primary lead, the trans character being played by a trans actor. That trans actor being... I've seen a lot of other people have this experience that I had. I don't know about you two, but so the actress behind what I'll call the main character, Cleo, is named Charlie Craggs, and this was her first like professional acting thing. I thought she was just as like naturalistic as the other two. Like I never would have picked that she was the first timer out of everyone listening from the first episode, but she was, which was, I gather, may have been another difficulty in getting all this going, because there's no star power. With a first-time actor, as good of a performance as this one gave. And that character also was very written around Cleo, written around Charlie herself, apparently. So that's a kind of melding between the character and the actor, which can, give you interesting results. So a lot of things that made it tricky to get this project started, and it did get commissioned in the end. So I think the show existing at all is a pretty significant victory, and existing in the way that everyone wanted it to exist, which is really cool to me.
It does feel, in the sense that it's grounded in the story of ordinary people. It feels like it belongs with Series 11, maybe after Series 11 in that big year and a half off. But also, there's so much continuity to it, and especially the focus on, like so much stuff, it's about 2 doctors. It's about the 13th Doctor and the 10th Doctor, really. So it does feel like it belongs in this liminal space as well, because, that's the focus at the moment, is between these 2 doctors. So it's interesting. It's
interesting on the liminal space thing we're coming back to. I heard Ella Watts in an interview say about how she had to pay mind to both the showrunners because of that liminal space she was in. She said,
in December, we are seriously considering commissioning Redacted. And like Christmas, I made a 40-page deck that was like, this is why it would appeal to young people. Here's some marketing ideas. I genuinely, like, I was at like my friend's mum's house where I spend Christmas, like on my laptop, like next to stockings, like pulling in like the brand images of like TikTok and stuff and be like, we could do this, we could market it like that. And then we submitted that. And then it was in January that Sounds were like, we're going to commission it. And like, poor Juno, like we just turn around to Juno and like, hi Juno, we know it took 3 years to get back to you, but we're now going to give you 6 weeks to finish like all of the scripts with all of these amendments, because by this point it's been announced that Russell is back in Doctor Who. And obviously, even though he was kind of distant from the series because Chris Chibnall is still the current showrunner, we had to be respectful of like 2 different showrunners and what both of them would want rather than just one. And so it was kind of like there was a bunch of canon stuff we had to bear in mind.
It very much does sit alongside this era, which I've enjoyed a lot.
Yeah.
It's a spin-off to this era and sort of the RTD stuff, but it feels like it belongs here more than it would against, I don't know, Series 10. Which I found interesting.
I think all 3 of us have spoken about this at various points, but there's a funny thing about kind of the... I don't think the Chibnall era started off this way, but it really started happening at a point where it's like Russell T Davies' first era started kind of accelerating into the background and then into the foreground. In terms of, like, you saw comics that were increasingly... The 13th Doctor was on the cover, and then the 13th and the 10th Doctor were on the cover, and then some were just the 10th Doctor on the cover. And we saw David Tennant doing an increasing amount of audio drama, you know, especially when COVID hit and he had a lot of, well, he was more available to do that, which we've talked about as well. That coupled with the show, for whatever reason, and there are multiple reasons, and you can argue and you can split hairs over this, you know, being a natural consequence of how ratings are changing and stuff like that, or whatever you want to say. But the show, no matter who was making it, the show wasn't going to have the cultural grab that it had in David Tennant's first era, you know. So there was this odd sense before Russell was announced to come back that there's a weird kind of prominence that David Tennant's Doctor, so appealing, kind of the Tom Baker of the modern Doctor Who, is increasing prominence in, you know, extended stuff like comics and audios. And even the Chibnall era itself, I think, was trying to harken back to Russell's first era more than the Moffat era, which is totally fine, you know, in some ways. And then the big event of Russell himself was announced to come after Chibnall's era. It's like it's such a timey-wimey thing. It's like the Russell T Davies era was kind of creeping in the background of the Chibnall era, and then it burst out in front of it again. And yeah, like this spin-off, I get that sense as well, where there's kind of funny engagement with Juno Dawson talked about how she wanted to pattern a lot of it on the first Russell T Davies era, and this was all thought up before he was coming back. So it's such a weird, like, organic thing how that kind of happened in the end. So a really weird spot for a spin-off to be in, where you're like, who's in charge of the show right now? Well, you both are, so I have to kind of mold around both of you. That must have been tricky. What an interesting state of affairs.
Yeah. And I think the other thing as well that ties into that is the fact that Ella Watts is obviously kind of in her late 20s, so was a sort of child of the first RTD era, as she's spoken about in interviews, you know, watching it as kind of a 10-year-old or whatever. I think it's wonderful to see that kind of process manifesting where, you know, people who grew up on the first era of the new series are now at a point of making their own content and writing their own stuff, directing their own stuff, and so on. And it's really the first, I suppose it's the first official thing that's really like that. I mean, there's one or two big finishes maybe that are by people who grew up with that era. But yeah, otherwise this is the first kind of big project that sort of feels like it's been, you know, come about as a result of someone's passion for that.
There's such a funny thing to that, because there's like that generational handover, you know, of, the kids who grew up in Russell T Davies era are making Russell's also making Doctor Who again now. So I don't know if it's a handover, but certainly there's a graduation of the original Russell fans, we could say, the first Russell era fans. Yeah, that's cool. That's interesting.
It feels like a shame. This isn't really the topic, but it feels like a shame that the second RTD era is coming instead of handing over to a fan of his era, someone of that generation instead. Although hopefully that's what's coming up in the next few years.
Well, I know Juno Dawson, in this good interview I watched today, she kept saying all she wants is more and more of this kind of storytelling and this sort of representation. She even specifically said, like, Russell's great, but we shouldn't just have like one figure like Russell out there doing what Russell does. And I imagine he'd be the first to agree with us as well. So yeah, absolutely. Lots exciting about his second era. But yeah, hopefully we don't end up in it like, is Moffat going to run the show after him and then Chibnall gets his second crack? Hopefully we're not in a time loop, Eve of the Daleks style. But yeah, interesting on this end to have younger people running a spin-off like this, for sure. Especially because, and Ella Watts puts this quite delicately, this is worth discussing. So Big Finish
is really good at making Doctor Who audio drama. Like, I love a lot of Big Finish stories. Like, I think Big Finish are incredible just as an organization and for what they stand for in like the history of British culture. Not even just Doctor Who, but I think for a really long time, it was felt that Doctor Who audio is kind of a saturated medium. Like, if you're talking about kind of companion podcasts, there are so many amazing fan podcasts out there that it's hard to kind of justify why the BBC would need another one, like whether you've got something like Radio Free Skaro or Verity or all of the like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of discussion shows, like it doesn't really make sense for the BBC to do that. And then if they wanted to do a kind of audio drama, then there's Big Finish. And they're also doing hundreds and hundreds of audio dramas. And that also didn't really make sense to them. So I think for this, it really came down to like audience more than anything, which was that Big Finish is amazing, but it does tend to be more popular with a slightly older audience, with a slightly more male audience, because that makes sense. Like, these are the people who grew up with Doctor Who, like in the end of the 20th century. These are people who like really related to the Doctor, and those are wonderful people. I'm a big fan of like the entire Doctor Who community, and I especially appreciate the fact that I honestly did not expect as many older men to genuinely and sincerely support Redacted, but I would just like to say right now, thank you very much for your allyship. That was a genuine moment of feminism, and I appreciate it. But Big Finish was making loads of stuff and is making loads of stuff, and they are increasingly hiring more women and queer people and telling more female-focused and queer-focused stories, and I don't want to detract from that. But not everyone can afford to like buy Big Finish adventures, and BBC Sounds and the Doctor Who brand felt that there was an audience who weren't able to access Doctor Who audio stories and who might feel that Doctor Who audio stories weren't for them. And so when it made sense for us to kind of make something for a different audience to Big Finish, and I've said again and again on social media, I don't think of us as competing with Big Finish. I want us to be a kind of pipeline into Big Finish. Like, we exist alongside them, but we're really not trying to do what they're doing. And I hope that if people enjoy Redacted, then they go buy a Big Finish adventure. But yeah, like, so it was partly just time, place, demographic.
We've all heard various Big Finish things and talked about various Big Finish things. Probably, I'm just guessing most of us probably liked the old Eighth Doctor stuff a lot when that felt like his era was living on audio. I know that's a lot of fans really connect with that stuff. Especially Big Finish, not cheap, I would say. Yes, there's free stuff on Spotify. There's a bunch of old stories, good stories, a lot of them too, that you can listen to for free, or well, you can listen to through Spotify and a couple of other platforms. They give out free episodes, but I like they give you a free episode which is like a quarter of a story. So I've never that's not really. That's like a sample to go spend money on the whole thing. Some fans always defend, they offer you free stuff, look at the quarter of a story you can get. I've never really understood the appeal there.
Although Ratings Wars is actually free. That's a full story. People go and listen to that. Get ready.
There's a couple. But by and large, and some of them are cheap. Some of the like 20-year-old ones, a lot of them really good, are like over here in Australia, $3. A lot of them, I don't know what that is in pounds. But generally, Big Finish charge, you buy a box set, generally, for most of the stuff these days. The box set might even be part of an interconnected series, so there might be 4 box sets for that story. The box set, I mean, you don't listen to it beforehand. You have, these days, it would be 3 one-hour stories, maybe an hour behind the scenes on it. You pay, how much do they cost in Britain these days?
I think it varies. Sometimes they're It's about 20 quid.
Wink is 1 hour-long story, and that's £9, I think.
That's like a regular jewel case CD, yeah.
So quite a lot. And then 20 quid for 24 for 3 stories.
It might be more. I think they have this thing where, this is getting a bit pedantic, but I think they have this thing where it's one price point, and then after 3 months it goes up or something to the kind of, there's like anyway.
The point is, if you want to listen to a lot of this stuff and you don't just want to listen to the old stuff or the quarters of stories, adds up super quickly. Super quickly. Along comes this spin-off, which is not produced through Big Finish at all. This is all completely free, and it's accessible. Like, there's a lot of BBC stuff I can't access because I'm in Australia right now. This is very accessible all over the world, loads of countries. Doctor Who Redacted. Super easy to get onto. It's just, the app or the website. 10 episodes, all free. It's a total paradigm shift from the other big mainstay of Doctor Who spin-offs that aren't on TV, which is Big Finish, there's a lot of interesting stuff. It costs a lot of money. This doesn't cost any money at all. That's really fantastic. That's one of my favorite things about this, is it's super accessible in that, and also that there are transcripts, which are very hard to come by when it comes to Big Finish, finding scripts. I've got one of the old script books, which they stopped doing like 20 years ago. And some audios sometimes get you PDFs if you're subscribed to whatever, but most of them don't have any sort of transcripts at Big Finish. But this has all lovely scripts, and they've even got, interesting stage directions and little, they're your proper transcripts here, which is really good. So accessible, it's free, there's transcripts. I love that. That's really great.
Also, it's about continuity and lore and backstory and whatnot without needing you to be caught up on continuity. The characters are all fresh, so you just sort of step into it. You don't need to have watched anything. If anything, it's relying on you having quite a vague memory of the RTD era. Versus Big Finish, where if you don't know who Jago and Lightfoot are, well, you get stuffed.
I'd also add as well, on the accessibility front, the fact that the episodes are largely about 20 minutes long, I think, is also rather good, because, that's is that the average commute length? I feel like it probably is. It's quite good for sort of listening to, I don't know, on your drive into work or on the train or, whatever. It's a bite-sized chunk. It's not a big kind of, there's an hour of this that I have to sort of commit to. Not
their fault, but I've never had Big Finish audios settle neatly into my commutes. I'm always like a little longer or a little over. Like, I used to have a 40-minute commute, and so I could listen to like, if I was listening to like a 1 hour one, I'd get there and it's like I'm like in the last act of the story, and then I have to like go to work or whatever. My last commute was now 20 minutes, so I could listen to like a fairly good chunk of a story, but then again, it's like I'm getting to the last act and I have to go do something else for 8 hours now. Not their fault, but yeah, not everything sits in.
I do miss Big Finish stories being in the classic format of 4 20-minute episodes. So that's perfect for commutes. That's excellent.
These I think we bottomed out around 18 minutes for Redacted, and the finale was about 30-31. So there might be issues with the length as well, but certainly for commutes, feels very tailor-made for commutes, yeah, which makes sense. Something else I liked, this will be more relevant to you guys, I guess, but so we had one character, our kind of main character, Cleo, is in London. And then we have another one of our main characters, Shawna, is in Sheffield, like Chibnall's era, Sheffield. Well, series 11 and 12, Sheffield. And then Abby, our other main character, is up in Glasgow. So regional diversity, which I know Juno has talked about wanting to embed into the series, because that's a type of diversity. Like we'll talk about all other kinds of diversities, but regional one as well. I get the sense from my understanding that there's some kind of a chafing in English media at that so much stuff is set in London or centered around London, and so there's a kind of joy when stuff is in Sheffield or wherever else. Would that be correct?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, even as far back, I think, as well, this isn't that long ago, but Life on Mars, the series starring John Sim, 2006. Like, there was a big deal made of the fact that was set in Manchester, and that was like, oh, this is, a big BBC drama that's sort of not in London. So, even as far back as that sort of thing, there's kind of been more of a push to try and, as you say, encourage this regional diversity, yeah.
All the big tentpole police dramas make a point of their setting. Stuff like Line of Duty's in a miscellaneous sort of Manchester-y city. Vigil, which was the recent one, is in Scotland. And they all make a big deal out of not being so London-focused. It's a big selling point. And
a Broadchurch as well, of course.
Yeah, of course. I think it's not just the representation of the characters being from all around the UK, but also the representation of that kind of friendship group that's long distance, which so many people of that generation have.
I saw some people complain, not many, but, of course, you're always going to get the complaints like, I can't relate to anyone because, it's three women, there's a trans woman to lead. What the? This isn't my, school yard life. I can't relate to this. Didn't see many of those comments, but I did see a few. You'd think most of them would be filtered out from listening, because the series kind of wears its heart on its sleeve about what it is and what it's about. But anyway, on that note, what I found really, really relatable was that the three friends live, and they're not like scattered across the world. It's like they're close enough that they could feasibly visit each other, as they end up doing. But it's kind of that uncomfortable thing of you're far enough away that it's just never going to be convenient, for me to come down, certainly on a weekday. Like, we're kind of within cultural grasp of each other, but we're not within we can go grab a drink grasp of each other. I thought that was so really relatable element of the characters. And on that similar note, the stuff where they're doing something together like a podcast, I mean, Abby cares about it. The true believer, Abby, does care about it. The other two, they're doing it for her, or they're doing it for each other. They basically come out and say this at some points. We're doing this just to keep hanging out and having a structured thing to keep us together. Because even, close friendships without any structure, a lot of friends will drift away just because, the friendship's born of man, I feel like we've talked about this lately. The friendship's born of proximity and stuff like that. So I really like that element of they live in these different regions, which is cool to get people from different places. They live close enough that they are, close friends, but they're not close enough that they can really hang out easily. I really like that. That was a cool kind of representation as well.
Yeah, it's really deft. They're doing the podcast really to stay friends with to stay in touch with Cleo, with Abby, aren't they? Yeah. This is a tiny thing. It probably won't take very long to do. I just wonder if either of you guys think there's any merit to my reading that the London, Sheffield, Glasgow thing is a sort of mini in-joke about the three showrunners, because obviously Russell is not from London. He's from Swansea, but his era is so associated with the Powell estate. Chibnall's is so associated with Sheffield, and Moffat, well, he's from Glasgow. There's lots of Scottishness going on. I wonder if that's deliberate.
I hadn't thought it through that much, but the Sheffield thing I did very much feel was like a tip of the hat to Chibnall and Chibnall's era. Yeah, you're right. It's I hadn't kind of knitted it through on Glasgow, but I can definitely see what you're saying.
There's something very Moffat-y about the fact that to represent Moffat's show in space, you're not going to a place that it was literally set. You're going to the abstract idea of Scottishness.
That on this note of the three places, I heard something really interesting in an interview with Ella Watts. I think we'll circle back around to this when we get more into detail with the stories as well, where she said her earlier idea when they were cooking up the show, like in 2019, was...
One thing that has changed was when we originally pitched the podcast, I wanted to try and get it out of London a bit. And so originally Shawna and Abby were also protagonists and they had much bigger roles. And essentially the podcast would flip perspective each week. So one week we'd be in Glasgow and Scotland, one week we'd be in Sheffield, one week we'd be in London. But because we only had 10 episodes, kind of what we realized the more we developed the show was that we just wouldn't have enough time for everyone to have a satisfying character arc when like realistically they would have like 2.5 episodes each. And so we decided to refocus it. And of all of the characters, the one that everyone kind of was most in love with was Cleo. And so even though Cleo is a Londoner, I think there are lots of other cool things about her, and there's nothing against Londoners. But it ended up being much more focused on Cleo and Cleo's journey than it had been originally.
But it was interesting that the show was going to center more in a kind of structured way around the 3 places at a certain point. I think that would have been quite interesting.
I am glad that Cleo was the focus. I slightly differently to you, I did find Charlie Craggs. I did find her performance more stilted than the others, but she's such a well-crafted character, and she's so charming. I couldn't have cared less. I found her performance notably a little flat, but just such a well-written, interesting person that it didn't bother me at all. And you can really tell that she worked so closely with the writers.
Yeah.
It really comes through. Her defining characteristic being her ability to swing her lack of power in any situation to take control of it. Just wonderful. It's so companion-y. Every couple of episodes, in the last one, she's like, if you don't tell me what's going on, I'm going to lie on the ground and scream. Like, that's who she is. She takes control of situations by using the lack of control she has in that situation and being petulant about it and stubborn, and that's how she takes over, and that's excellent. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, she's an absolutely wonderful character. I think there's a sense as well that throughout the whole run of episodes, really, she's this kind of constant Cleo charm offensive. In the way that, they sometimes talk about sort of a new Doctor's first episode has to be a kind of charm offensive to sort of win you over immediately to their kind of way of doing things. And yeah, you get that all the way through. I do agree with Oliver that sometimes her delivery can be a little stilted. I think a friend of mine put it quite well that sometimes when she's asked to react to some dramatic outer space shenanigans, the line kind of ends up sounding a little bit more like, I cannot believe you just snogged Kevin type reaction, rather than, whatever the death-defying robot is. But I think this does improve, actually, as the series goes on.
Yeah, some of that, I think, is underwriting as well. Like, there's some stuff in some episodes where it's like, even if she was delivering this with the most incredulity as she could summon, the line itself is kind of so casual in response to, a crazy threat that it's, difficult, but that's just part of what the series was focusing on, I guess. When I was listening to the first episode, I was writing down notes about the 3 characters next to a picture of the cast, just to, really set out everyone for me. And yet, what impressed me was just from the first episode, which like 18 minutes, I got a bunch of notes for all 3. Couldn't do that for every new episode of a Doctor Who era, but I could do it here. I had like double the notes on Cleo compared to everyone else, which it's kind of like how I felt about how I felt Graham was being focused on more than the other 2 way back in the 2018 days. Sometimes it happens. You have 3 characters, some will get more focus than the others, but they all were characterized here quite directly. I think the dialogue was pretty full on.
Yeah.
With like, Abby is the true believer, Shawna is the skeptic, Cleo is on the fence. I feel like we got that very clearly communicated to us with how the dialogue chose to go. But still, there are some Doctor Who characters you couldn't even do lines for that on because there's so little there in the first place. So good, direct, clear. These are 3 different people, with 3 different aims, 3 different approaches. They felt like separate characters, and they felt like authentic characters, which was good.
I think direct is the right word.
Yeah.
Because there's, the characters are very clear, but it's not always done as deftly, maybe, as it could be. Which isn't always a problem, but there is a sense of people being very clear out loud about their relationships and saying exactly what they want all the time. Which, I mean, as a spin-off to an era where I don't know what most of the characters want, I'm not complaining, but there is a deftness lacking, I found.
There's a kind of, well, we'll get more into this later when we get more specific with the episodes, but there's a kind of tension here, I think, where I'm so impressed that something like this exists, and I'm so happy it exists. And I do genuinely think quite a lot about it as good, and I praise a lot about it. At the same time, I don't want to do this kind of tyranny of low expectations thing where I'm like congratulating it for baseline stuff, even if it's stuff the TV show might not even be rising to at points, because I feel like it does it more justice to give it the high expectations, which it does meet in certain ways. But yeah, I totally see what you're saying. Yeah.
One thing, just talking about the way the characters are presented and so on, I like that the team had obviously thought about how, various of the sort of attributes behind them kind of influence their different attitudes and so on. So you talked about, for example, Shawna being the skeptic, but there's also the detail that she's a kind of, she's a kind of prominent woman of colour within the storyline, and she's the most skeptical about sort of the police and the establishment, and the kind of has the most doubts about UNIT and all the rest of it, which, that's a sensible, logical decision. The fact that Abby obviously is a carer for her mum, and is also, maybe this is more of kind of my, filling this in with my own brain, I don't know, but the fact that she's sort of so organised and she's the one who kind of runs the show, to me that makes sense of her being, or that fits very well with her being a carer for somebody, because it just kind of, she's always on top of things. That worked for me. As I say, not necessarily even a deliberate link, but just the characters kind of made sense as people in that sense to me.
They all feel cohesive, and they don't feel like pieces on a chessboard or anything. They feel like proper characters unto themselves, for sure, which is a credit to Juno, I suppose. Yeah, good work there.
And really refreshingly, in the same way, the character's queerness is sort of bled through everything about them. It's not like they are characters who happen to be queer. It's connected to everything in their life in a way that doesn't define any of them, but is an important part of who they are. Which it's the kind of queer writing that you literally only get from queer writers.
Yeah, they've talked a lot about this, Ella and Juno and Charlie, about a weariness with queer narratives that are focused on queer trauma, a disconnect with queer narratives from people who aren't queer. I saw in an interview, Ella Watts said an interesting thing where when she was younger and engaging with like lesbian cinema, so much of it by straight men, she was doubting her own queerness because she didn't feel connected at all to how that was depicted until she started engaging with stuff, made by queer creators. That is interesting to me. And also the weariness with the trauma, which makes so much sense. Some people will commission a show, with a focal trans element, and it'll always, from their perspective, it might be a well-meaning thing, but it's all centered around just the most crushing, stuff. This is our powerful representation, and it's, someone getting murdered or, abuse or assault and all this kinds of stuff, which is so, yes, it's representation, but it's so crushing to have that, especially when there's a kind of singular nature of if that's the only real stuff getting commissioned. Imagine being a young trans person, and if you want to see yourself on screen or on audio, you're represented, but you're represented in narratives where you're getting hurt, constantly. Like, that's crushing stuff, which is why stuff like shows like Heartstopper and that sort of thing get so much a kind of wholesome connection, because they're doing these narratives and they're doing this representation, but in the broad way that like heterosexual representation will be. There'll be some crushing narratives, there'll be plenty of non-crushing narratives. There's all the variants and tones the human experience can have is the obvious ideal there. So it was interesting hearing them talk about how they wanted the queerness to be cohesive and a coherent and a very solid part of the show, but at the same time they didn't want this to be like, this is a sad trans story, as much as some of Cleo's backstory is sad.
Yeah, I was about to say that it's not that there has never been any trauma, because as you say, some of the backstory there is quite thorny and difficult, and relations with her mum and so on. But it's not sort of all trauma all the time. It feels like, a corrective to, as you say, those more kind of grim, dark type stories, with the way that it is relatively optimistic in terms of where it ends up. And obviously I'm sure we'll get into that with regard to the finale. But
it strikes me that this kind of doing it optimistic and kind of warm instead of the alternative. Even like Clive from, Russell T Davies' first episode with Rose Tyler, Clive the Conspiracist, he's kind of, he gets received as a joke a lot, although there are stories that give him dignity and stuff. He's kind of he's a middle-aged guy, rustling around in a shed with a bunch of his geeky ideas. Yes, he's married and he's got children, and, they seem, they seem to like him well enough. It's a kind of, the Doctor Who obsession is something he kind of hides, or something he kind of ferrets away and he keeps away from people, and that people kind of see as weird. The kind of 2022 version that Ella and Juno are doing here is like the conspiracist obsession is like a really social thing and like a really warm thing. And it's something three friends are doing together and they're all having a laugh about. And it's, a very kind of wholesome thing. That's really interesting that they're taking, Clive is mentioned in the series. Like it's kind of, it feels like a very direct kind of parallel to me, but it's so different in the way it's being realized here. In this 2022 way, in this queer way, and with these specific characters. I thought that was interesting.
It's closer to Linda if Linda sort of wasn't entirely destroyed. It's sort of showing fan communities in the same way Linda does in Love and Monsters, but without the element of it kind of destroying your life that Russell obviously goes for.
The whole thing is very Love and Monsters.
Yeah.
To the point where I think you could make a good case for it being quite a direct sequel to it. Especially that idea, like you say, the ideal version of Linda, where it's not really actually about I guess you call it fandom. Like this podcast, their Blue Box podcast, they're not the same kind of obsessive that Clive is. That they have this sort of passing interest. Well, one of them has quite an intense interest. The other two are basically there to hang out with their friend. It's all very much an excuse for them to do some art and to hang out together. It feels like that ideal version of fandom that's less about the actual text and more about what you make from it, which is nice.
I guess this kind of connects to the kind of young people talking about the Doctor thing, is that the actual writers behind this. So Juno Dawson, established, like she's done a bunch of stuff. Who else do we have? So many of the other writers. Juno did most of the episodes. She was running the writing for this show. But so many writers here were very new to the game. Largely people not from the pre-existing Big Finish sphere. A lot of younger writers, or at least, people new to writing this kind of stuff. So it was really cool to me to get new voices to have a spin at Doctor Who, in this form or any other. That's something I like to see. I think that's kind of a great thing about a spin-off on TV or otherwise is because it's not the main thing, it's kind of easier to hire on people to have a play with. And, then they can graduate up. People like James Goss himself, now such a heavyweight at Big Finish, graduated up from doing kind of ancillary material in Russell T Davies' first era and stuff like that. So that was good to me, young, fresh writers.
Definitely. Yeah, I hadn't heard of, aside from, as I say, the two who had, or the three who had done stuff for Big Finish before, Juno and David K. Barnes and Doris V. Sutherland, I hadn't heard of the others at all, which is exciting. No, that's great. That's what I want from a new roster of names, and you kind of go, oh, I'll go Google that person, and oh, they were connected to the Magnus archives or whatever, I thought that was great.
The last things I can draw in comparison to Big Finish, I guess, are for one, using the current Doctor is exciting, and it really integrates and it makes the show feel like something now. Like you can tell someone, hey, you want more Doctor Who? You're annoyed that there isn't a season on right now? Load up Spotify and you go listen to The Chimes of Midnight and everything. That's all well and good. But you're asking, go listen to something like 20 years old. It's not the same thing. As great as a story might be, there's a different aspect to it when you're saying that there's a new episode next week, and there's these episodes out now and you can join in now and it's happening right now. That's a really important quality to a lot of people. And on that note, that it's weekly as well. Like I know and I especially have thought about this. It's something I talked a lot about with the Dalek Universe 10th Doctor audio series and the Torchwood seasons as well. The Big Finish format where it's like you get sporadic box sets, where you get 3 or 4 stories bundled up together. and then a couple of months pass, and then you'll get 3 or 4 stories bundled up together. It's quite a strange format, but getting a new episode every week, around the same time, 10 weeks in a row, that's TV, and that's great. And that's really easy to follow along with, and it's really easy to integrate into your life. That's really cool. So I really like that aspect of this as well. Not that I listen to it week to week, but I like that it existed week to week.
It's also quite a forgiving format, I think. You'll have more perspective on this than I do, but week to week, I wasn't that concerned about, the direction the plot was going in. It was all very much, it's my weekly time to check in with these characters I like. It's very forgiving of I'm sure we'll get to this in more depth, but a plot that's a little bit hazy and not there, maybe.
Our friend in Giga was saying to me today, we were talking about the reviews that The Time Traveler's Wife, which Oliver and I and him have been talking about, among other people on here, how the reviews for that, he reckons, part of their flavour, because the critics got all 6 episodes together as screeners, was that it's a show that works in one way if you're watching it week to week, like we've been doing, and it works in another way if you're binging it as screeners, because it's quite, it's like listening to the same song, in quick succession. It's quite repetitive with its kind of thematics in some ways. For me, listening to this all at once, the stuff, I don't know to what extent it flagged up people listening week to week or not, but there was repetition and similarities in a way that was a little mind-bending at times, and it made me think of that Time Traveler's Wife critic stuff. But so absolutely different experiences. But releasing weekly is so good for engagement, and so I love that it released weekly, even though I ended up not engaging with it in that way. Some other random bits I liked before we start getting more specific. In episode 7, those great moments where characters are interacting that normally wouldn't interact. It's just kind of very humany, womany conversations. There was with Cleo and Shawna's nan. That's right. Yeah, this was one of the high points of the series to me. It wasn't like this huge conversation, but it was just this feels totally like 2 real people and they're having a real human conversation and connection. Dialogue was working really good. I was just very happy with the series at that point. I don't know if you guys even remember this moment.
So Shauna's nan rings her up and she's in the bathroom or something, and Cleo answers the phone call. Yeah, I thought that was great. Yeah, you don't often, like you say, get that kind of thing of, I don't know, I can't imagine Graham answering the phone and talking to Yaz's sister. I mean, do you know what I mean?
And I think that plays into the queer joy of the series. The fact that it's not this unrelenting, depressing experience of oppression. Because every time someone calls in, or they just bump into a friend of a friend, almost all the time it's this really affirming, not always perfect, but always trying, friendly situation. All those conversations of, I just wish she'd find a nice lesbian girl. Just lovely. Just really lovely. And it's lovely to see relationships like that not on screen, on my phone screen.
Something else I quite liked in the series was also in episode 7, the Requiem, like Zoom grief group. I find grief support group stuff are quite interesting. It's an interesting thing to write, and I was really interested by a lot of the dialogue that the Requiem lady was having there, and it was calling to mind for me. I rewatched all of Better Call Saul this year and leading up to its final season, and my favorite season of that, season 4, has this big arc about grief support group, which really dives into all the weird, specific and strange, like, emotional and mental stuff that goes on in them. And there was stuff in that show and in here as well about the weird feelings you get when you're starting to forget someone that you're grieving. So I think it's such an uncomfortable thing. It's like people don't like talking about it because it feels so wrong and sacrosanct. So it was interesting to see that invoked here. And I thought a lot of the dialogue that the Requiem lady had was quite interesting. Of course, it gets reframed in later episodes in certain ways. But yeah, I liked that setup. I thought the Requiem support group was interesting and some interesting dialogue going on in there. That was another kind of very memorable part of the series to me.
There's a lot of this series in the more abstract moments that are playing on a lot of themes I really love. the idea of redaction and forgetting and trauma all being related ideas. There's the suggestion at one point that I've written about dozens of times that maybe forgetting things is just our brains rejecting information that's too dangerous to hold on to. All that stuff about how the redaction, the sort of plotty stuff about things being removed from time ties in with questions of trauma and that idea of forgetting people, the almost embarrassing, guilty feeling, forgetting of people you've lost. I found that so interesting, and that's so my kind of storytelling.
Yeah, I thought episode 7 was really good for that, wasn't it? Like say the one with the support group. There's that beat with a woman who she's like, I know I've got a son, but I can't remember anything about him. So I thought that was it was one of the best episodes, I think, for showing sort of the emotional toll of what this redaction idea, this kind of high concept idea, would have on people.
Yeah, so we're about an hour in now. So I say let's open up to getting more specific about the events of the episodes and our thoughts on the storytelling. Specifically, there was an interview I read earlier that I want to start this bit of our discussion off with. In this Guardian interview with Juno Dawson, she said something I'm going to hang in mind a bit for the next thing I want to talk about. And she's talking about the characters. The three loser-tears, as they self-deprecatingly style themselves, discover that everyone who has ever met the Doctor is disappearing, their very existence being forgotten. They're being redacted from reality. That's the article. And the article goes, is there an allegorical significance here? Somewhat, says Juno. The notion of being silenced or erased feels part of the online language nowadays. But I would say to the listener, it's Doctor Who. Don't read too much into it. It's more about a threat hanging over the world. Yes. One of the things I took some issue with in the show was I felt it raised up quite a few interesting ideas. And yeah, it raised them. And it didn't do as much with them as I would have thought would have done service to the story. Like, one of them was the kind of dementia-esque stuff with people being redacted. Like, there's that kind of horrifying, to me, moments where Abby starts not being able to keep stuff straight. Normally she has all her notes and everything, and it's kind of slipping out of her head. Forgetting people you don't exist. The grief group, the stuff about, not being able to remember people you're being attached to. In episode 4, Larry from Blink, his forgetting his wife, Natasha. What a horrifying thing. In episode 7 with Requiem, not recognizing people in pictures in your house, missing family, and all that sort of stuff. I thought that would be a really interesting way to realize being redacted. But like, I just read out your examples, I don't think there was a huge amount of engagement with stuff like that. And even with the queerness stuff, I totally get why they didn't want to center the more disturbing or like trauma-focused stuff about it. So I understand not wanting to parallel like being forgotten with like how Monica kicks out Cleo. Like, I understand why they wouldn't want to knit a line there. But I felt like they weren't really threading through much at all with the redacted allegory, whatever it is. And like Juno says, there's that kind of disinterest in doing that sort of thing with it. And so I had that with a few things here. The mass hysteria stuff as well. Like, they raise up a few historical examples of it, but it's not really connected with much. It just kind of then is used in service of Oliver, not our Oliver. RTD's Oliver and the Jadoon. The virus stuff as well. Like, the Doctor has this speech where I'm almost thinking, is this like a COVID thing? She's talking about, I can't fight. There's this tiny little thing and I can't fight it. What an enemy that I can't face. That's all around us. And there's the kind of vaguely political stuff sometimes where it's like there are liars out there and it's just kind of raised. And the biggest one for me where I feel like it's just kind of there and then it's nothing's really done with it is, and I understand why, and it's an issue I have with Chibnall's era as well, coming from very different creatives, but the kind of half-hearted engagement with the Doctor being a woman, like when the Doctor is saying technically we really don't have time to get into all that now. Why? It's like you've had 10 episodes and we've got the Doctor and the main character, the spin-off together, and you've kind of raised up the idea of, Cleo is a trans woman, and the Doctor it's very complex how you want to deal with that. You know, some writers are going to come to it different ways. Obviously, the Doctor isn't, you know, trans in the literal way like a human is, but the Doctor has had an experience sort of as men and is having experience sort of as a woman now. Like, you could do some stuff with that if you wanted to. And I understand not wanting to, but I just felt like there was a lot of stuff in this series where they kind of raise up interesting ideas and they might kind of lampshade it, and then instead of doing anything with it, they're going to do another episode where, you know, Cleo's going, oh, you know, people, why can't anyone understand what I'm saying, the Doctor? And we're going to get another New Who episode recapped instead. And so I felt kind of adrift at points in the series where I'm thinking, like, I like your ideas. Why the disinterest? Like, why the kind of fan wank of RTD1 era stuff instead?
There's that really, the way that the threat is realized, I found really effective and really interesting and intelligent, and not the kind of thing Doctor Who does. And even the payoff that it's all a weird conceptual virus. Neat. I really like that. All the scenes of just forgetting somebody in the conversation, in the grief meeting, they just blip out and nobody remembers that they were there until it's just the main characters. All that stuff is really excellent, and it's taking that central idea of redaction and branching out every way you can dramatize it and make it into a Doctor Who-y threat in a way that really works. But it doesn't feel like it connects to anything particularly characterful or thematic throughout. There's moments of it paralleling trauma, and there's the whole idea in the last episode, which sort of flags out of nowhere, of them being truth seekers against a world that's trying to redact them. And this idea of the tension between speaking truth to power and power oppressing truth. But that doesn't feel like it's been what the show's about at any point. And there's a lot of really, this happens so much in Doctor Who, really annoying little thematic contradictions where the Doctor tells them that they can't write about this experience, presumably because of this feel that they need to keep, they don't want to change the status quo of the Doctor Who universe too much by having them talk about their experience of the blue box, and they have to forget all their experiences to keep, I guess, their real world real feeling. But the Doctor then also says immediately after that, make sure you do keep writing and talking about the truth. So she's telling them not to spread the truth, not to write about their experiences, but also to keep doing what they're doing because it's so important. And there's just, and that's not necessarily an issue in and of itself, but it feels like this show doesn't really know what it wants to say about, you know, speaking truth to power. And that's not really the focus. The focus is more on the characters, but there was something there. There's something asking to be connected between those two ideas. And the whole idea of redaction that hangs over the whole series just never feels like it quite interacts with the characters.
Yeah. What it's not doing is it's not doing the sort of kind of, you know, Joss Whedon and Buffy Angel type thing of having whatever the sci-fi, fantasy, supernatural conceit of the week is immensely rooted in some sort of metaphor for, you know, high school experience or, you know, whatever experience it is. And yeah, it doesn't really do that. It doesn't marry the two. It's much more about saying, right, over there is a sort of high concept Who plot. Here are some characters who are the sort of people who you don't often see in high concept Who plots. What happens when they react, you know, the folks in this column react to the story in that column. But yeah, I agree that there's not much marrying together of the two elements in that sense.
There was one time, well, one of the times I felt like it was trying to connect more. Here's our real life issue and here's the Doctor Who issue. Was in episode 3, there's that dialogue where Abby's like, normally when people go missing, there's a rational explanation, which is why it's not on the news. And Shawna's like, they don't make it on the news because they're people of colour. And Cleo's like, or they're trans or adult service providers. And so that's a super real and super serious issue they're bringing up, you know, and that you can tie it into the redaction stuff. You know, it's like these people don't exist or like they're being forgotten, you know, despite, you know, being very much real. So that's all interesting. And then to what end? It's to, well, I found a friend of Ryan Sinclair, you know, because Ryan went missing last week and, you know, now it's all about the Doctor Who redaction stuff, you know, it's so they've kind of invoked this super serious issue, and it's just to kind of talk about Ryan and just be, our redacted thing of the week where Cleo gets to go, huh? But I'm saying the Doctor, why don't you understand me this time? Last week you didn't understand me either. It's so, I felt like that was one of the times where they were trying to link in the real world and the Doctor Who world thing more, and that twinged at me a little bit because I was thinking you've just brought up very well, you've articulated it well, a very serious issue, and then you've talking about Ryan with it, and it's just our Doctor Who redacted stuff. So yeah, I don't know about that moment.
I think it speaks quite a lot that a lot of the times in those kinds of situations, the things that the characters say are more interesting than what the actual story is doing. Because the characters feel so real and lived in that when they react to stuff like that, when they say, people get forgotten all the time, people don't turn up on the news all the time, it's a political thing, that feels like something that comes from the characters, but the story itself doesn't have a sense of that. The story feels like the characters have more of a sense of politics and meaning than the story itself does, which is slightly odd.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the Doctor herself sits really awkwardly in the series. Because the whole premise is that these are the ordinary people right on the fringes of the show. They're the kinds of people who don't make it into the TV show, but they're also the people who, also lived on the power estate, who looked up to. I think it's best embodied by the fact that the characters here look up to the added characters in the novelization of Rose, right? Like they are right on the fringes. They're so far on the fringes. And that whole idea of redaction ties into that as well. They're the forgotten people. All the cameos we get are these weird side characters, the people who never got picked up on or followed through, like Oliver from Smith and Jones, right?
Yeah.
It's all these people on the fringes. And that ties in really, really well with the redaction and the people getting forgotten, because these are forgotten characters. And the fact that the revelation that it's people who have known the Doctor, who have interacted with the Doctor, who get knocked out of time, as if it's their side character-ness. It's the fact of there being side characters in another person's story that gets them redacted. Like, they're forgotten because they were, C-tier characters in a one episode one time. It feels like the Doctor's this corrosive force by the story always being about her, other people are forgotten. And that's really thematically rich. That idea of who gets to be the main character of the story. What happens when a character who's such a centre of gravity pulls other people out of their orbit. That's the kind of, that's a very Capaldi era kind of topic, but it's something really interesting. The show feels like it's keying right into. And then in the last episode, the Doctor just turns up and is the one who fixes everything. And there's the classic bit of handing off between her and Cleo, where Cleo gets sort of the real climax and the Doctor gets another bit of the climax, which Doctor always does, and it's very good at sort of mechanically balancing those against each other. But it feels like a show about the people who get left behind and who shouldn't need to be saved by the Doctor, getting saved by the Doctor. When it's the Doctor's main character-ness that's destroying the universe, her sweeping in the last episode and being the main character in a really big and showy way feels like a shame. I think Jodie's great in this. It's one of my favourite performances by her. But I also wish she just sort of had stayed in the background and it could have been more about the side characters.
In the lead up to this, a lot of people were wondering, is this going to be like our first flavour of RTD2 in the kind of vibe of how it was feeling? And I know this is why I was surprised by Redacted actually feeling a lot like a Chibnall era spin-off to me, in that we had this thematic, very disparate thematically, where it's like we have all these ideas and they're not really connecting much. And like, I know Juno Dawson's a fan of Buffy, so the classic, like we're saying, the sci-fi thing connects really directly to the domestic thing. I was surprised that wasn't happening so much. And then also the Chibnall era thing of, so we're raising up ideas and we're not connecting them heaps. Also, we have this weird kind of tension where we kind of vaunt the Doctor heaps, but they're also kind of a corrosive element in the storytelling, and it's really easy to read them quite malevolently if we want. But then we're going to swap around and, you know, be really heroic about them as well. These are all kind of Chibnall era storytelling issues I have, so I was disappointed to see them in here.
It's interesting that you compare it to Class, I think, which is also, you know, obviously another spin-off from a few years before, and has the issue of the Doctor turning up in the first episode, not showing up at the end. The Doctor shows up at the beginning, maybe, you know, a bit of kind of passing the baton on to the new characters kind of thing, sets them on their task. And then in some ways, the whole of the show unfolds from how much of a bad decision that was, and kind of how much of a sort of disaster and trauma it all is. These characters just being in the wake of the Doctor, but the Doctor not being there. And in a way that works quite well because, the Doctor doesn't turn up in episode 8 or whatever it is and sort of, you know, solve things. You know, he's conspicuous by his absence at that point. So, I think they're in some ways they occupy quite similar spaces, Redacted and Class. They both sort of feel like they're dancing around a kind of critique of the parent show to an extent. As you say, you know, this idea of a kind of corrosive influence. But, perhaps having the Doctor turn up in the last episode does undercut that. I see what you mean,
Earlier, Oliver, you were mentioning, like, this is the show about the forgotten people, you know, and the people, you know, not centered in most of the narratives, the Doctor Who narratives. Shawna has a big speech in episode 7 to that effect. I don't know if you guys... I don't know if this got to you guys the same way as me, but for me, that note, whenever the series played it, felt kind of odd because, you know, it's all about, you know, this is about not the less important people. This is about the people focused on less. And so I guess that, you can, like, say the journalist from Partners in Crime and the Doctor from Oliver from Smith and Jones, you know, are kind of the forgotten ones. But I think the whole nature of talking about Doctor Who lore so much kind of, for me, disconnects from, you know, we're the story about the 3 women, you know, and we're not about the Doctor Who stuff, you know, so much. It was about these 3 new characters. And yet we're going to mention concepts from Doctor Who Annual 2006. You know, in every episode we're going to do a parade of, you know, Partners in Crime and Linda and Ryan and Graham and Rani and the Khans and Luke and Clyde and Martha and Joe and Mr. Smith and Giant Spiders and Sheffield and Yetis in London and Maggots and Welsh Minds. And we're going to recap a video game to do with the Weeping Angels. And then we're going to do a lot of unit stuff. We're going to do lots and lots of Doctor Who gags. We're going to throw you back to 2006 with the classic Rose, you know, moment in the finale more than once. It's like, I feel like you've got such a solid new set of characters, and you're even having them say, you know, like, this is our story, you know, it's not about, you know, other people, this is our time to shine. But I felt, and this might be to an extent that I listened to it all in a row, but I was feeling so weary of, you know, what RTD episode am I going to have recap this week? Oh, it's a video game this week. It's a Weeping Angels video game I'm going to learn about this week. It was just so much stuff. And I know I saw an interview, Ella, the director, felt some insecurity with Am I Whovian enough, you know, to bring this series to life.
Before Redacted came out, like, I was so scared that people would hate it. I'm a new Who girl. I don't know Classic Who as well as I should. I was so worried the Doctor Who fans would feel like I didn't know the property well enough. It was my first commission as a producer. I was so worried that people would just look at it and be like, as a producer, she's not good enough. So this young woman shouldn't have been given this job, and she messed it up in this way and this way and this way. And maybe people think that, and there's definitely things that I could have done better. It is my first commission. But I remember making a decision early on, having a conversation with my partner where I was talking to them and they were like, okay, what's going to make you feel like it was worth doing? And who do you actually care about? Like, do you actually care about someone who's like, there was no reason to make this incredible series or work with people that you admire more than anything, like Juno, because you like, and I only say Juno because I knew about Juno before I met Charlie because I've read her books. But like, you know, are you really going to regret that? Because like some person says, well, you missed this episode from Classic Who that was aired in like this, like, no, like, and I think I came to the conclusion that I was like, you know what, like, even if everyone hated it, even if we released the first episode and we just got torrents and torrents and torrents of hate, if there was like one person who didn't even have the internet, who was like me and wasn't allowed to access these things until they got out of their home, but one person who heard that one day by themselves sitting in their room and thought, you know what, actually it is worth staying around and I can be happy and I am a hero and I'm funny and I'm likable and I will have friends and I will be safe and people will care, then like it was worth doing.
And I feel like that stuff Ella is talking about did work, in that I do get that sense of warmth and authenticity from the characters, but the hang up I'm having here is it's the opposite of what she's talking about. It's not that I felt the show wasn't Whovian enough or her direction of production wasn't Whovian enough. It's that I felt like the episodes were weighed down by all the continuity stuff when their original material and characters felt so much more interesting and alive to me than relitigating old New Who stuff so much. And so I don't know if this was like overcompensating, but you know, I know Juno wrote the series, so I don't know if there's any connection here at all, but I felt like for me, there was way too, like, I felt this was outclassing Big Finish in terms of fan wank at several points, which it weighs me down, you know, in a story. When I really like your three main characters and I really am interested in the drama you've set up around your Cleo main character, especially, I was getting so over the continuity references and all the continuity stuff, especially, and like the finale most of all, like we're saying, this weird tension of, we're meant to be about these characters and we're even saying them, you know, the story's about us, and yet the Doctor's, you know, doing all this and the virus is all about the Doctor. It was just, you know, some adventure the Doctor had, basically. It's this weird tension between Doctor Who stuff and our new great characters that didn't work for me.
Well, and even the kind of traumatic thing from Cleo's childhood ties into the
from Blink.
Is it the red hatching from this adventure in Blink? Yeah,
and it was Love and Monsters. Like, I was waiting for the penny to drop. Listening to that, I was going, this is literally
it's the same beat, isn't it?
Love and Monsters. This is Elton's exact backstory, and so I was waiting for, so what's the shift going to be, you know, or is this going to tie in with Love and Monsters? No, it's just we've given our great main character the Love and Monsters backstory, and we've put it inside Blink. What is the thinking here? Like, you've got such a great character and such a great set of characters. It's so weird, because like, I think the type of people to enjoy this premise and this kind of thing are probably going to be familiar with Love and Monsters, and it's like the exact same backstory. So I don't know what the thinking was there. Like, it was emotional to me, but I was also like, yep, so this is Love and Monsters. What's the idea? It's the exact same backstory.
I was going to say, I think you might have hit the nail on the head there with the word overcompensating in a way, because I think there might have been, this is total speculation, I think there might have been perhaps a sense of concern or kind of insecurity that this would not be received as Doctor Who-y enough, that it would be seen as too far removed from what Doctor Who is. Obviously, you know, they knew that they could only budget for having Jodie in it a certain amount.
Yeah.
And so perhaps there was a sense that, you know, well, we have to make sure that there's enough sort of, you know, treats and Easter eggs and kind of Osgood and Kate and Vastra kind of along the way, to keep people, you know, who want their sort of Who fix, you know, invested. And you know, I can see the pros and cons of that. So yeah, I do see what you mean.
I think I'd have been a lot more sympathetic to that, and to like, we got to keep the, well, it's a very kind of functional thing at the end of the day, I think, because I don't know if this was the actual thinking or this is just how it panned out. But if you bring back if you bring back a Doctor Who thing every week or every second week, you can have a nice little press push where it's like, this week we've got Vastra back, or this week we have this so-and-so back, this week we have this back, which really helps you, you know, week to week or fortnight to fortnight, being able to have a little more push than just, it's the new episode out. You can say, hey, do you remember this from that? You know, this is back. So I totally get that. And I think part of my complaint about the fan wank there is kind of that if there was more other stuff going on, I wouldn't care so much, because I wouldn't be thinking about, you know, really, we're recapping a video game this week. I'll be thinking about, wow, that new development this week was interesting. New development, the first maybe 6 episodes felt the same to me. They felt very, very, very wheel spinning. It's people are disappearing. Only Cleo can notice. Yep. And the last 2 episodes are basically the ones that get to do the whole plot and resolve the whole plot. I've no idea what the thinking was there. I know this series had an incredibly fast turnaround, so I'm totally sympathetic to that. But like by episode 7, like the state of affairs is pretty much the state of affairs in episode 1, which confuses me, especially when you're bringing all these other writers in, and you've got a really good writer in Juno Dawson heading it. I'm not quite sure of what happened there. And this was super clear to me because I listened to these, in a row. Was it the idea that it's like a variation on the theme each week? It just felt strange to me because it was so repetitive, and that would have been fine to me if we were learning a lot of new stuff about the characters or doing interesting new stuff there each week. But I felt we were mostly spinning the wheels in all regards up until episode 7 and 8-ish, which was sad for me because I really liked the characters. I would have liked more stuff to do with them, and I would have liked more concepts and whatnot in the episodes, so I'm not thinking, wow, why have we got so much fanwake? If I had other stuff to think about in addition to that would have been great. But I don't know if you guys felt the same way. I felt a lot of wheel spinning in the show.
Yeah. Continuity, right, is a really powerful and interesting gadget in storytelling. You can do so much interesting stuff when you're writing for something with a history. It's why adaptations are so cool, because it gives you a whole other text to bounce off. But so often, like you're saying, the references end up just feeling like references here. The one that I really loved was getting Penny in. I think it's the first episode. Because Penny is famously a could-have-been companion. She was written as a companion, unwritten from the show when Catherine Tate came back, and then included in the episode anyway as a stray could-have-been. And her treatment in the episode is like brutal. She's not given. It's this. She really feels in the margins and on the fringes in the way that the show is at least setting out to explore. That one in the first episode felt like a really intelligent choice to me, and there's moments of that throughout. Is her name Sally Salt? Sally Salter?
From the Rose novel, yeah.
From the Rose novelization. Her inclusion as well felt quite deft and interesting, and some of the stuff with Larry playing off the way that the Lonely Assassins game rewrites his future so that he doesn't stay with Sally Sparrow. That feels in the margins, and it feels interesting and obscure, and in a way that it doesn't quite coexist with the main show. And that stuff was really interesting. That ties directly with the idea of redaction and directly with the idea of these not being characters who get to be the focus of the show very often. But it doesn't end up being sustained. It ends up being this passing idea, nodding towards notions of characters who never got the limelight without ever getting to what that means.
It's interesting to me. I agree with what you're saying, but it's funny to me. The one that worked for me was Oliver in episode 3, and not the ones that worked for you. So I don't know if that's saying, was it okay that they kept doing different ones since different ones were working for us? But in episode 3, Oliver worked for me because I really liked the reality denial stuff. We know that what he saw happened. Well, because we've seen Smith and Jones. And so for him to kind of shrink down and deny his reality, I think is a spooky thing. It's like a disturbing thought to, like, I know what is real, but I'm going to pretend it's not real because I want to, I want my life to go normally. I think that was quite resonant and interesting. So that was the one that interested me. But I agree with what you're saying, that with all of them, it's just like they bring it up. And if we went further, it could have been really interesting. But it's like it feels more like we're bringing up these characters for continuity than we're doing a big redacted, analogy with everyone. That kind of disinterest there, which is a shame. Yeah,
I was going to say that she's in a slightly different category. But the thing I'd argue that the Vastra stuff worked better for me because, unlike lots of the others, she's not particularly compared to, say, the Unit and Osgood and Kate, who are very much kind of coming in and doing the Unit, Osgood and Kate shtick, if you see what I mean. They're coming in and doing the things that they do on the program. I liked the Vastra element because it felt like they would do it by having her in the modern day, and by having her in actually rather a sort of wretched existence of this kind of living in the sewers. And her, her Jenny has died, and there's not even any mention of where Strax has gone. Maybe he's died too. She's very much not coming back to just do, she's not coming in and doing her kind of elegantly gliding through Victorian England kind of thing. It's not a Paternoster gang kind of revivalism. I like that did feel distinct. And also because you're mentioning wanting sort of new concepts and stuff, she's the one who brings in this bizarre and quite amusing alien creature called the Floater, which pays off the alien fetus in a jar gag, is also a funny name, and is voiced by a talented YouTube comedian who I quite like anyway. So that felt new.
Yeah, I found her usage strange, but I agree. It's not like here's the Vastra moment, with Vastra. It's doing something new with the character one way or the other. And when we got the reveal that she was Vastra, I went back and I reread all her dialogue. And it was interesting to go, this could be about the 11's grief in the Snowmen. That could be kind of what she's subtweeting there. So I thought it was well done that I didn't feel like it was super, who could I be, in her dialogue earlier on. But while the dialogue did feel from Vastra, looking back on it. So I thought that was pretty well done.
Yeah, I thought that was an effective inclusion, especially seeing as, Vastra is one of the... I think one of the best queer characters in the show. And so it feels important that she's there. On an entirely personal level, I've never really liked the fanish assumption that she outlives Jenny and just keeps living on Earth forever and lives this sad existence, which I swear I've seen somewhere before. It feels like what me and Nia were talking about a while back about just drawing a straight line between two ideas. If you just draw a straight line off her last appearance, she keeps living and Jenny dies. I've always much preferred the idea that either somehow Jenny outlives her or they both keep going forever. But it's an effective inclusion anyway, and that's just my personal gripe.
There's another element of the storytelling, I don't know how much it stood out for you guys, that I found a bit frustrating, especially with the stories altogether. It's that so it's not just the repetition of Cleo being like, why don't they know what I'm saying? Why doesn't it? They don't. Redaction, it's going on. It's not just that we get that so many weeks in a row. It's that we get so many moments of basically, it's dramatic irony to a point where it feels like an idiot plot to me, where it's the audience understands everything and the characters understand very little. And we get that done again and again and again and again, week to week. Or characters realizing things way after the audience does. I don't like that. In episode 4, there's stuff about could the Weeping Angels be connected to the blue box somehow? No, it's like there's so many points where I'm like, what are we doing here? It's like I know you're generating an episode a week, but I know this is wrong, and I know Cleo was. I know what's going to happen here already. I know the score, from episode 1 and everything. It's this year. I've been listening. Better Call Saul showrunner Peter Gould does these insider podcasts on his own episodes as they come out each week. And in this final season of the show, the last season ended with what felt like a big character tricking everyone about a huge thing. And then in the new season, almost instantly, that character's nemesis works out the trick, right away. And so the showrunner was saying, I know a lot of other people wouldn't have done this. They would have, you've got a setup here, where this character's tricked this character and you can mine a lot out of that. And he said that might be true, but then the audience is going to feel like this guy's an idiot. It doesn't matter that within the context of the fiction, it makes total sense for the character to be tricked. We're not in the fiction, we're in the real world. And the audience is going to feel like this very clever character is an idiot if he is hoodwinked by this other character, no matter how airtight the trick might be. Therefore, the other character needed to work out very, very quickly this trick in order for the audience to keep feeling like this character is intelligent, which really resonated with me. And I really agreed with what that showrunner was saying here. And I thought of that a lot in this show, where it's like, I can accept intellectually that our 3 leading ladies are smart, absolutely. But the positions the narrative are putting them in makes them feel not intelligent to me, which is frustrating because it's not fun to watch people flounder around. And it's repetitive for me to have these people keep coming to the same conclusions that they should already know. And it's that disconnect wasn't fun to me, basically, that I felt like I knew so much more than the characters, not in terms of Doctor Who lore, but in terms of the story's own ideas and what the story was doing. So that was really frustrating for me, how little the characters knew or how long it took them to understand things.
I like the starting point of them being this really quite crappy podcast who somehow they've not put together the Doctor Who mythology, even though according to the show, it's just, you can just Google it. You can just Google who is Doctor Who and find it. You can just Google Doctor and you get some results. But I like that starting point of them being so far on the fringes, they just don't know what's going on, right? They can't figure out how to get past Unit's firewall. You know, they're all drinking retcon. But you then want to catch up with the audience quicker. You want to start from that point, and then the first couple of episodes have them figure out who the Doctor is, and then we're following them as they figure out the mystery. Instead, it takes the whole series for them to catch up with the basic premise of the TV show, which isn't, you know, it's not the most important thing ever, but when so much emphasis is placed on that mystery, and the mystery is something we know because we've watched it on TV.
I imagine if in series 6 of the revived show, if every episode had the characters forgetting stuff because of the silence and they didn't realize what was going on until like the finale. That's basically what it felt like to me here. And it's just, as cool as some of those concepts are, it's just frustrating to watch the same misunderstandings happen week to week, episode to episode.
There's a reason that with the silence, their second episode invents a little hand gadget, which adds a whole new dimension to the scenes with the silence in. And then their next episode invents an eye patch, which again adds another dimension. And they're all quite natural extrapolations out from the original. I love the eye patch, because you go, there's a monster you can only remember when you're looking at it, so just tape a picture of that monster over one of your eyes. It just makes sense, right?
I think there were shades of the silence handwriting stuff here in episode 2 where Cleo like uses the Sharpie to write the stuff about the Doctor on herself. But still in the episodes after that, we're getting clear, well, I'm saying the Doctor, why don't you understand what it's like, but we've been over this so many times. It doesn't matter if it's airtight in the fiction or not. It's just frustrating for me as a listener to have this same misunderstanding happen over and over.
And like they take control of Unit, which is fantastic. I love that moment of they've been taken prisoner and Cleo goes, hold on, you guys don't know anything. Guess what, bitches? I'm in charge. Yeah. That's excellent. But then they take over Unit and it sort of doesn't change anything. We're still at the same status quo of everyone going, what's happening? What's going on?
The Unit, there was a moment in the Unit stuff where it's like, I think it was Abby and Shawna are having like a little side quest about a Dalek or something like that. Do you guys remember the bit I'm talking about? Yeah. And I was listening to this and I was thinking, this just feels like a side quest. They're just exploring for, if this was on TV, this would just be to have a Dalek show up. Like they're just exploring for no other reason. At the end, they reintegrate into the main plot. Anyway, one thing I did like with Unit was, and I was a little cagey in the first few episodes. I was like, wait, what are they doing here? But in episode 10, we kind of get it said like Unit bad. And so then I was like, okay, you were playing the long game. But like in earlier ones, I was really disliking Osgood. It was trying to rationalize and be like, no, it's totally fine. We're just sorting some stuff out. You know, it's come on. And it's like the Unit, they kidnapped him awfully. They tasered them. The Unit were quite bad in this story. And so Abby going in with them, I felt betrayed as well, along with Shawna and Cleo. It's good to have some emotional, that was when I felt like the series was finally moving around, when it was doing stuff there. Because the characters were in a new status quo with each other. So the Unit treatment, early on I was like, I can't tell how you want me to feel about Unit because I feel like they're awful here. But no, the series knew exactly what it was doing. It went all Unit bad in the end. So that was good.
There's a lick of Peter Harness there of properly just going, nah, they're bad. And I love Osgood being a character who, I don't know, we all love. She's very likable. But she defends the system. And, her and Kate are like, oh, we shouldn't have been so rude about it. And, that guy's been fired, whatever. But they're still, they're running the show.
Yeah.
And they're okay with it fundamentally. They're okay with making these sacrifices, oppressing people a little bit for the greater good. And it's great that the show just goes, no, that's bad.
Yeah. It reminded me of reminded me of Tosh in Fragments as well.
Yeah, yes, yeah, I love that.
But yeah, this idea that UNIT kind of just hold people in cells for, however long and kind of without charge, and they interrogate and all this. Yeah, I thought that was a nice, sort of dark mirror of the usual TV show presentation of, and nostalgia for.
I guess it's like these are three like working class ladies here. In the show, the Doctor might get in an uncomfortable stitch up with UNIT, but he's still like their scientist and their boss, in a lot of ways. We're going to get them kind of in a more positive frame, from that perspective. But this was kind of a neat nature of the spin-off, was because these people are so not the Doctor, we get to see UNIT, like in that Tosh in Fragments light, which I really like, because they've got a funny relationship to the show and the character UNIT over the decades. So it's interesting to see him portrayed like this.
The combination of likability and the fact that we all like Osgood and we all like Kate and we like UNIT as an idea, playing up the tension between liking them conceptually and liking the characters, but then being a terrible institution. That's a really strong take on UNIT that the show should probably engage with.
It's quite savvy to then have Vastra, of course, call them out as well, because the idea that Vastra is aware of, the plot of Doctor Who, Silurians, that was a nice little beat.
What I love there, especially because this spin-off came out, this started the same day as Legend of the Sea Devils, and to have this moment where the old 70s Silurian episode is called out, and then it just hangs there, and no one, well, actually, it's just, yes, that was bad, and it's just left there as a statement. That felt so good, thinking back to how Legend of the Sea Devils hounded it in such a weird, that happens, all good, kind of way.
And that's such a good approach to shittiness in the show's history, going, yeah, that happened. Just think about that. just sit with that. And you can't, make it better, but that happened. Deal with it. Process that. Okay. We were talking about the other spin-offs, and I think there's something really interesting in the logic of Doctor Who spin-offs. We're seeing at the moment all this talk about Whoniverse and doing an MCU stuff, but I think what's interesting that people don't really touch on is that Doctor Who doesn't actually lend itself to spin-offs. Of the TV spin-offs we've got, 2 of them are this same sort of thing as Redacted, where it's sort of dark, real world, what happens when the show leaves characters behind, right? Torchwood, Class, Redacted are all very much about that. What happens when the Doctor's not there. And Sarah Jane Adventures is just Doctor Who with a palette swap. Doctor Who, but with kids. So both types of spin-off, it seems like, and I guess, K9, whatever. But both types of spin-offs are sort of twists on the formula. They're either Doctor Who without the Doctor or Doctor Who in a different setting. Because as much as Doctor Who is anything you like and can do whatever, it's also a very strict set of rules about how stories work. And I guess the fact that it can do anything means spin-offs don't naturally come from it. Because you've got a box that says everything possible, and that's Doctor Who. Great, how do you spin off from that? I think in a way it's sort of kudos to Big Finish, who've managed to just tell stories with the characters. I love the Riversong box sets that I've listened to, which is about half of them. But that approach of not worrying too much about the relationship to the main show, at least sort of conceptually, and just going, well, here's some stories with characters who aren't on screen. I hope Redacted gets a second series, and I would really love if it just did a story with these characters instead of trying and not quite managing to reflect the show itself.
My favourite Big Finish range is the Torchwood monthly range, because it'll just do one-off stories. Sometimes about characters, like Juno Dawson's one, those characters never in the TV show. Nothing to do with the TV show. Never appeared again. They exist entirely in that hour she did, and that's it. It's just a story beholden to itself. And some of these stories won't even really be beholden to genre. They will just be very, very domestic, character-y. Like, here's basically a James Goss short story. about something he's been thinking about. It feels so freeing when you move out of this is Doctor Who, but it's with Jenny, or this is Doctor Who, but with whoever, or no Doctor, no rules. This is what happens now. It's when it's just a story about these characters you've made, it feels like it's kind of out of that shadow of a spin-off, like you're saying. I would love that with Cleo, with Abby, with Shawna. Yeah, absolutely. I think their character's strong enough to support that kind of storytelling.
Oh, just a little note. I was going to say, plus you get the advantage of a second season, fingers crossed, that catching up with the audience aspect is totally, that's all done and dusted now. And so you can just kind of get on with going, right, okay, well, what does the status quo of the Cleo, Shawna and Abby adventures, look like?
I feel like Juno and Ella are good enough at what they do. And, the way this was produced was so quick, at the end, that a second series, if it happens, and I hope it does, I wouldn't necessarily anticipate the same issues, we've been critiquing here. I think it could be, and a lot of people will say this with spin-offs itself. Like, I don't actually agree. I like Torchwood's first series a lot better than the second, but a lot of people say the second series really shaped up and it got rid of loads of the flaws they saw in the first series, and it really cleaned itself up into a better narrative, they thought. I could totally see Redacted doing that. And I'd like to hear that. Sure.
I really hate to give any kudos at all to the MCU. But kudos to the MCU. All their spin-offs, much more, I've not watched most of them, but all their spin-offs, much more than the Star Wars TV shows, have been stories in their own right that often get sunk by being attached to the MCU. But, a woman is trapped in a sitcom projection of her ideal life. That's an idea for a TV show. Guy gets made to work for a time agency he hates. That's an idea for a TV show. They are separate ideas, and I think this is actually how they're produced. They are just pitched as TV shows, and then some exec figures out how to make it a spin-off. I would much rather that kind of approach for Doctor Who spin-offs in future. I would just love a really good idea for a TV show that is enhanced by being put in comparison to the show itself. That more modern model of spin-offs as stories in their own right that have a big premise to them. I guess it lends itself more to mini-series than ongoing shows, but I sort of hope. I'm not massively big on the idea of a big Doctor Who MCU, but if we're going in that direction, I hope that it's more... Vinay Patel is trying to launch his own sci-fi TV series, right? I think it would be a really decent thing to do to just take that series, put a little Doctor Who above the logo, and fund it. That kind of thing, just taking stories that especially young creatives just want to tell anyway. Really good ideas that probably wouldn't get funded. Especially, I mean, if RTD used Bad Wolf to fund a whole range of young queer sci-fi, that would be the ideal for me. And that's what I sort of hope Redacted turns into if it gets another one.
Interesting to think of the spin-off in these kind of shades. Yeah, very much. Something I want to ask about the resolution of the finale, that there wasn't really a conspiracy, that it was like something from the Doctor, and that the finale was so Cleo focused. Also, what was the deal with the robots? In episode 2's cliffhanger.
I think that is a loose end. The Ravulocks.
Kind of resolution stuff. Also, that the resolution is like them broadcasting "Wake Up." I thought it was going to be set up, and it was going to be like them heroically transmitting like a podcast episode out into the world, and we're going to use all the knowledge from the blue box files. Kind of the Big Bang. Amy's going to reconstitute the universe through her memories. I thought we were going to be, they're a podcaster, so they're going to save everything through a podcast, but they just say "Wake Up" on the broadcast.
That would have been very fun, rebooting the Doctor Who universe with the slightly mangled version that they've put together of their investigation. So now the adipose invasion is like a weird conspiracy because that's how they rebooted the universe. That would have been fun.
That would have been delightful.
Yeah, so I felt the finale Like the broadcast thing, that was just a little, I thought it would have been cool if it was a podcast, but whatever. I know Ella didn't actually want to do too much found footagey, we're listening to a podcast now stuff with the show, because she thinks that's been, it's been played a lot in other audio dramas and podcasts. But I was surprised that the resolution was so, the Doctor, stepped on a thing and, not really a conspiracy. I know we talked about it a bit earlier too, but the finale felt odd to me with those elements.
I think there's a lot of room for the Doctor just stepped on a thing to really work. The idea that the Doctor's ended the world entirely by accident because the life she lives is so big compared to the lives of ordinary people that just a slight misstep can wipe everything out. And this is the impact that misstep has on ordinary people. Feels like a bit of a reflux, where the universe has ended and a lot of the story is just sort of floundering about that universe. Like the robots that just turn up at the end of episode 2. They're just part of the universe that while all this redacted stuff's going on. It feels like it's trying to paint a portrait of a whole world that's been impacted by this thing. And I think more successfully than Flux does, but neither manages to be particularly holistic about it.
It's a good comparison, actually, because I just checked the dialogue in the finale that mentions the robots, and it says the Doctor says, a lot of very bad people and things took advantage of the situation, which does echo that beat in, where is it, Fluxet 5, where the Doctor's kind of saying, there'll be all these...
All the scary refugees!
Will be coming and up to their usual mischief. I thought about that. The other thing I was going to say is the idea of the Doctor stepped on a thing and this psychic virus happened. That's kind of the end of Amy's choice, isn't it? It's the random bit of psychic pollen has latched onto the Doctor. It's a tiny little sort of, I don't know, like a sort of little dandelion seed type thing that's just latched onto her as she's gone here, there, and everywhere. And it's had these massive ramifications. Okay, Amy's choice, the stakes aren't as high in a way, sort of universe-wide or planet-wide, whatever. But yeah, I sort of thought that was interesting.
It's one of my big tastes in sci-fi is this big thing was actually a small thing all along. I really like that kind of resolution. Oh, it was just a thing. It was just a weird meme parasite. And I love meme parasites, so here we are.
Well, like the Edge of Destruction.
Edge is one of my very favourites. It's an incredible story. I think it was a little thing all along. I think what it is, it's like when I was complaining about the fan wank, and then I'm thinking I probably wouldn't be complaining so much if other stuff was going on. I think it was just a little thing. If I felt more meaning and I felt more like stuff being stitched together in other aspects of the story, I think I would have been more open to, it was a little thing, and my expectations were it was a big thing. But because it's like I'm not feeling I'm not feeling the connected stuff in other places. It's like it's just that all along. It was just a very literal Doctor did a thing. I'm kind of yearning for someone bring all these things together and actually make a big thing. For the shrinking down, it was a little thing. I feel like you kind of need to have the raised thing in the first place, so you kind of get that dynamics of big to small, or dark to light. And I didn't feel that so much, which I think was why it works for me in some stories and it didn't work for me so much here.
Well, I thought it was interesting the way that 13's used here, where it's very recognisably 13. There's even little cute nods to the Timeless Child stuff, where it's just enough cute nods to acknowledge it's going on, but we're not gonna talk about it. But I liked 13 being reframed as politically decent. There's lots of moments I really like. It doesn't quite fit with the rest of the story, but the world is full of liars feels like a better iteration on the fascism stuff in Spyfall. And yeah, the Doctor talking about when Cleo was a little girl made my heart explode.
One of the moments I really liked 13. That right there, yeah, that was really affirming. I didn't like the speaking truth to power stuff too much, because I just felt like this series wasn't directly political in that way where I wanted it to be. And then 13 of all people is coming up to kind of vaguely talk about, speak truth to power. And then you were saying, but isn't she doing the opposite with making them like forget her stuff?
She's redacting them.
It's the kind of things, it's the kind of lines, you stitch them on a pillow, free of context, and I'm going to look at them very differently to actually in the frame of this episode and this story.
Yeah, and again, it fucking sucks that the Doctor didn't take Cleo with her. She really wants to go! She really, really wants to go with her.
Stuff like that, I'm like, don't even bring the idea up if you can't do it, because then it just feels depressing. Like, don't even have Cleo want to go. Have Cleo, if you don't raise the idea, like if there's no even idea of, wait, can a normal person go travel with her, then we don't get this depressing moment of Abby and Shawna are like a second choice, compared to the Doctor, kind of understandably. That just felt oddly depressing.
The classic one of that is Osgood's in the Zygon 2-parter, where the Doctor goes, come with me, and she goes, no, I have better things to do. I would have loved this. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have said yes, but I don't need it now.
There's three things about the dialogue I want to say. One is in episode 6, there was such a Chibnall era dialogue with the Doctor that I was very authentically Chibnall era, for better or worse. The Schrodinger's cat thing. I don't know if you guys remember it.
Cleo, lovely name. I met Cleopatra once. In answer to your other question, yes and no. Bit of a Schrodinger's situation. There are no cats harmed in this thought experiment.
What? That is not important. The other two ones are more important. There's a thing where characters, it happens in fan fiction a lot, where you kind of want to build up a character or bulk up a character, and to do it, you kind of piggyback the existing attachment someone has to another character. You've probably read fan fiction where it's like the main character, like your whoever, your Luke Skywalker, your Alistair in Dragon Age, whoever goes and says your OC Donut Steel is the best in the universe. They're actually the smartest person in the world. Is this new character you've fanficked up? I don't like that kind of writing because it was a bit cheap to me. There were a couple of instances of it in this series which rang off to me a little bit. One was Larry in episode 4 then goes on this big impassioned thing. It's so cool what you do. The Doctor about the podcast. In episode 7, Osgood about Abby, you would be the perfect one for Unit, and I think you should get a job working from home right now. Unit needs you. At least that one developed out into an actual drama for Abby in the end. But there were a couple of dialogues here when I was thinking some of the other spin-offs, like I think Torchwood and Sarah Jane do a good job of not kind of falling back too much on, well, the Doctor says it's okay for us to have this show, and the Doctor thinks we're really cool, actually. So yeah, understandable impulse for a first spin-off, but yeah.
There's a hint of something more interesting, I think, with Cleo, where her relationship with the Doctor is immediately really spiky, in the way that, Cleo sort of is with everyone. But I find that so much. It then develops as it goes on into, wow, you're the best person ever. No, you're the best person ever. But that starting point of Cleo just not having any of this bullshit, that's excellent. I loved that.
What was with, it's like a 13th Doctor guns never use a moment where she's like so offended by the bat and so.
She's like, oh, you always go to violence. I thought you were better than that.
The other dialogue thing, it's probably the biggest dialogue thing. I'm interested, because I think everyone will come at this differently. There's a lot of colloquialisms, and there's a lot of these characters speaking, trying to make them sound authentically like, they're these queer women in their 20s. For me, I've spoken about, I think Gig had less tolerance for this than I did, but for Shawna and for Abby, it worked for me. I thought they felt pretty authentic. For Cleo, I think at times they overdid the kind of, we spilled the tea about the blue box, and we ratioed our alt-right neighbor, that kind of thing. Like, I think there's a balance where it just feels like a couple of camp friends, and then there's a point where it starts feeling like, I know it's actually a young woman, writing this show, but it's almost feeling a little James Goss Doctors Assemble boomerish in how much you're giving them to say these kind of lines.
I felt the opposite. I felt Cleo's worked for me. Because I didn't get the sense that...
That's interesting.
I get the sense that that's Cleo trying really hard to be cool and hip and with it. Yeah, so that worked for me, her doing all these colloquialisms. And also, I at some point, I think it's the Life is Strange thing. You've just got to bear it at some point. You've just got to put up with that.
You know, I like the Life is Strange dialogue, even in episode 1. So yeah, maybe I have no foot to stand on here.
I didn't actually make it through Life is Strange because of the dialogue, but you know.
There we go.
Sort of on the same note, I like that, you know, the patter of their dialogue is so full of just, this isn't kind of, you know, a massive thing to praise. It does not sort of get lots of brownie points, but it's just so full of things that ordinary young people do talk about. You know, it's the, you know, there's Harry Styles and there's QAnon and there's the fact that the Observer is transphobic and there's the, you know, all this sort of stuff. It just feels like it's made in the actual Britain of actually today, which the Chibnall era kind of doesn't. You know, it feels like it's rooted in very material concerns about the world around them. Even though, you know, it's not like the show has loads to say about Harry Styles or QAnon or whatever, but it just acknowledges the culture, the wider culture. I love that.
I think it just struck me now, because I know some people that haven't actually listened to these, they've just read some of the transcripts of them. And, you know, for accessibility reasons, that's all some people are going to do. I wonder if the dialogue's going to play, like how you guys are saying you read Cleo, like very performative in some of the colloquial stuff she was saying, or, you know, like very kind of put on or trying to compensate or, you know, act like this for whatever reason. In the performance, you know, you're getting these kind of flavors. In the text, in the transcript, some of that's not going to be there, even with the stage directions, you know, a lot of the time. That just struck me as a random little note. I wonder how different the characters actually might feel if you're just reading them instead of hearing them.
The thing that Ella Watts said about not wanting to do too much formalistic stuff with the podcast, I think that's a shame. I think it's a really interesting format. And there's the really great running joke, which feels like an iteration on Yes, We Know Who You Are with Harriet Jones, who gets mentioned in the last episode, where people keep going, like Unit or the Doctor or Aliens or whatever, keep going, yeah, we've listened to your podcast. That's very fun. But I think a more episodic, I'd like to hear what you guys think, but a more episodic version of this show might have been really cool, where each one is a podcast.
When I was listening to that interview and she's like saying, yeah, originally we're going to do it like a point of view episode thing, you know, like how TV does, and we're going to switch every week. I was like, what? That would have been great.
Yeah.
Why didn't you do that? And then they're saying, well, we wouldn't have been able to do the character arcs over the what? Like, the Cleo got a pretty good character arc, I think, in the end. The other two, like, I want to talk about this a little more in a minute. Abby and Shawna like had this, Shawna, I like you, Abby. I wish you'd get rid of your boyfriend. Abby, well, eventually I do. Now let's kiss. You know, like, they didn't have as much. Like if this was what we could accomplish with the 10 episodes in this format, what was going to be accomplished with the smaller, like if you're having 2.5 episodes to themselves? I don't know. I'm sure there was a lot of logistical stuff and whatever, but the idea of doing more, it didn't have to be like the whole series, but the idea of having like an episode just in Glasgow with Abby, I really like that idea. I think that works so well on TV. Like Lindelof shows, you know, do that all the time. It works so well on those. I would have really liked that. The formalistic side, it's not like saying all 10 episodes had to be like the found footage podcast thing, but like one might have been fun. Yeah. I know the turnaround was so quick, but I would have loved to have seen some of these ideas that the story really lends itself to, like doing one of them just as a blue box thing. But yeah, to do these more formalistic things might have been really interesting. And like the talent is there, you know, behind the show. Like Ella Watts, I saw her saying she listens to this inordinate amount of podcasts and audio dramas. So I think she will have all this experience and knowledge. Maybe for her, it's like, you know, like for us, we have experienced so much Doctor Who, we come at it from a kind of alien way compared to like, you know, other viewers. Maybe for her, it's like, well, I've absorbed all this, so, you know, I'm coming from this to a different spot where the more casual audio drama listeners might be coming to. I don't know if there's any basis for that. But there's obviously the talent and the knowledge there. So, yeah.
I definitely have seen a few people saying they would have loved, you know, more of the podcast itself within the, you know, within the story.
On that note, Torchwood Series 6, which is one of the 2 audio seasons they've done. So it is 12 episodes. which are like hour-long, Torchwood episodes. Some of them are like more point of view-y, some of them are more, a bit of everyone. But it had like a prologue episode, which was an in-universe podcast from like conspiracists within Cardiff. And it's all in character, like it's like an actual podcast made up of these fictional characters. And it kind of seeds some ideas of Torchwood Series 6 along the way. And it also kind of satirizes, these kind of podcasts along the way. And I believe it was free too from Big Finish. That was a really good idea. It's kind of the same idea as the Blue Box Files, and I thought that worked really well a couple of years ago in Torchwood Series 6. So even just doing like a prologue, I was about to say spin-off episode, even just doing like this kind of tangential thing where it could even just be like 5 minutes of the actors improvising off each other or something, or the Blue Box, I think would have been a really cool thing, because we never really got to hear like an actual Blue Box episode beyond like a bit of the introduction and whatnot, and that would have been really fun, I think. Yeah.
Soothing Beach Sounds?
Yeah, Soothing Beach Sounds was another Torchwood audio story that was really interesting formalistically as well. Yeah.
That's that kind of thing that the Torchwood audios do, I think, is really cool. And Live 34 as well.
Yes, yeah, with the Seventh Doctor. Yeah.
I love all that stuff.
I was going to say, arguably the Angels one comes the closest to doing some of this because of the way that she's kind of narrating for the others as she goes through, and then obviously you've got Larry's narration. So that, and I don't actually, I've not really listened to the Magnus Archives, but I gather that was drawing on their style of doing things quite a lot, taking its cue from that sort of thing. But yeah, that maybe came the closest.
We've got a real running theme, I think, of our discussion here, which is basically we like the creatives behind this, and we think there's a lot of cool potential in the show, and we're kind of like, we wish you would have done, the stuff you've kind of set up, and you have the skill sets to do. Would have been really cool to see more of that realized, where, as much as we love the characters, a lot of these episodes felt more shallow and repetitive, in what they were kind of doing instead. And it only, I think, nags at us because we like the premise here and we like the characters so much. If we didn't care so much, we wouldn't be, excitedly, what if they did this, what if they did that, so much. So I think it is kind of a credit to them to even make these sort of complaints in the first place, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a podcast and because it's tangential and because it's in, the off season, it would have been really easy, I think, to drop off Redacted, especially with the plot being as sort of meandering and sort of cyclical as it is. So I think it's a real credit to just how much fun the characters, especially Cleo, is. The every week I was like, hell yeah, gotta spend a bit more time with these characters. Which it feels like the characters are such a strong foundation. It would be a real shame if they didn't get a second series to take the ideas somewhere new. And I think make it more episodic, make it
yes, please.
a little bit more focused, maybe.
I would like it to be much more story of the week and actually have different stories of the week, pretty much. Here, I just felt like we had maybe 6 or 7 episodes, which felt like the same thing to me, and the same thing that wasn't even progressing, but just like kind of the same thing. And I don't want that again in a series 2.
The only issue I can think of is, what would you call it carrying on from now? Because obviously Redacted is the brand name, essentially, but the next season would presumably then not be about redactions anymore. So it'd be better to kind of reboot it as a kind of continuous thing called the Blue Box Files, maybe. I don't know.
Redrafted.
Keeping the re is a good idea. Yeah, actually, that makes sense. Yeah. I only have one real thing to bring up before like summing up, and that is I went back and forth on this. The stuff with Shawna like coveting Abby. So we start off, Abby's got a boyfriend who we never hear. Craig, he doesn't have an actor, we just hear about him. Abby is a boyfriend that she's had since she was 16. And Shawna really doesn't like the boyfriend. And we can tell Abby's kind of aware of what's going on because a couple of times she tells her like, enough, Shawna complains about the boyfriend all the time, and it's pretty obvious. She's like, I want to go out with you instead, so I'm going to tear down your boyfriend at every opportunity. The boyfriend gets let down all the time in the show. Like, he's the one, like, she's missing out on dates or whatnot. But you have all these good reasons for it, of course. At the same time, the boyfriend doesn't sound like a great guy in that, he doesn't support the podcast. At the same time, she is privileging the podcast above other stuff, but at the same time, we also can see there's good reasons for a lot of it. Basically, he doesn't sound like an abusive guy or anything, but he does sound like, not the best guy. Shawna, I felt, was a little pushy with how she kind of harped on Abby about it in a way that made me, when they kiss at the end, I'm like, okay, like, I don't really feel like this is a huge triumphant thing, even if they're well matched for each other. Because, you know, we've probably all seen situations in friend groups and stuff where like one friend is, you know, at another one for years while they're in a relationship with someone else. And then as soon as it ends, they like pounce and it's like they're together. It's like, yeah, and maybe you're even well matched, but it's just a weird kind of vibe for, you know, you to be dragging down the boyfriend for years, as annoying as he might be. I don't know. I had a lot of mixed thoughts on this one. Like, by all means, I like Shawna much more than this Craig guy who we were hearing about, who I didn't think much of. But also, I don't like the things where a friend like clearly wants to go out with someone and pushes it a lot and then kind of gets rewarded by it actually going to plan at the end. So I don't know. How did you guys come at that?
I see what you mean.
I found the real issue was that we don't get a sense of the relationship with Craig being like founded in a flaw of Abby's. We don't get the sense that it's that she's scared to break up because she needs that security and she knows it's not going to last and she knows they're not going to work together, but she's too scared to break up. It doesn't feel like anything like that. We don't get enough sense of why she's in this relationship and why she wants to not be in it. It's just she is in a relationship and the plot and the story and we, the audience, know that they're not going to stay together and that the main character who she's going to end up getting with is a better fit because she's the main character alongside her, right? It's that sense of we know that these two characters are going to get together because they're the leads in the show that we're watching, rather than having any actual material relationship issues between the two of them. Like, it's clear there's stuff going on, but it doesn't feel as if the fact that relationship is sort of staggering to a slow death is based in any of Abby's issues that are explored elsewhere or that are central to her character. It just feels like point A is she's in a relationship that's going to fail. Point B, she's left that relationship.
In episode 3, Shawna's like, Abby, I wish someone could see her because she's the most amazing woman. She'd be running the world if not for going out with this dickhead of a boyfriend. And then in the last episode, Abby's like, yes, you know, I'm confident now, so I've left my boyfriend behind. And like, yeah, like in episode 5, we get that he texts her way too much. And in a couple of episodes, we get that he doesn't support her like interest in the podcast. So, but I just feel like it's so... It was one thing if she was her friend just wanting Abby to break up with Craig because Craig, you know, is bad for you or whatever. That's a totally separate thing. But it's that I want, you know, Abby to leave Craig and I want Abby to be with me, you know, is kind of the sketchy thing, I thought.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, I will add that the detail, I think it's episode 5, where she says, oh, Craig must be going out of his mind. If I don't reply to his texts in like a minute, he freaks out. Yeah, and then it's Cleo who says, girl, that ain't healthy, which I think was good because, you know, it's good that somebody else who's not just Shawna says, you know, that's not good, you know, because that isn't healthy, obviously. That's kind of quite oofed as a situation. So, yeah, I think that helps a little bit, but obviously that is only just one line. So, yeah, I see what you mean, and I did see some of those complaints going around that Shawna was laying on a bit thick. I suppose, you know, the usual thing about kind of depiction is not validation or whatever the phrase is.
I think it's a point in favor of Shawna as a character. Like a good character is when you like and you dislike some parts of them. I'm just not quite sure if like what the show's kind of stance on this was, but Shawna being a kind of pushy, you know, I want to get with you kind of friend is good in that, like, that gives her a distinguishing detail. Like, I don't get the sense that the other two are like that, you know, which is good to keep them distinct.
Yeah.
But yeah, she came across as annoying to me in that regard if, you know, I was Abby. So yeah.
It would be interesting if they did do a second season to really run with the idea that, oh, they're together now, and maybe it's not as easygoing as, you know, Shawna imagined it would be, or something. You know, I mean, I'm not saying, oh, it needs to be sort of tragic, but you know, something about kind of, oh, the real day-to-day difficulties of that sort of situation, I think would be cool.
I would love an episode that was just like them together. Or an episode was arguments about who's going to move where, well, I guess they'd have to move to Glasgow because of Abby's mum. But, you know, just a domestic thing. You can stick a little alien thing in it.
Yeah.
But just an episode that's like little, they're in the flat together and, how are they going to live together with Abby's mum there or something? I would love that. I would love that much more than Cleo, huh? Why don't people understand? I'm saying the doctor word. Why doesn't anyone understand?
There's a fun thing when you're a friend group that's usually like online, doing something like a podcast, and then two of you meet in person but call in to the other person. So now you're in the same situation you were in before, but now two of you are in person and one of you isn't. I think that would be a great setup for an episode, just one of them spending the night at the others for the first time, and they're also recording a podcast and tensions, and yeah, it's fun.
And all this stuff is like you just stick in, you do a Buffy, you know, esque, and here's the sci-fi thing that parallels the isolation or the topic of the week, and you're cooking with fire, you know, that I think this would all work great.
Also, the fun thing about the show is it doesn't need a monster of the week every week, because it's all about recounting stories that have happened. So you could have the actual sort of sci-fi plot be just historical, and it's reflecting thematically and dramatically the characters in the present. So you're still getting a fun sci-fi Doctor Who story, but it's just being recounted and pieced together from the evidence they're collecting. And you don't need to have, like, a parasite in their room as it's happening. You could do fun stuff with the monster story happening in B-plot that they're talking about on the show.
I was going to say, or you could have... I was reminded of the other day of the Day in the Death, the Torchwood episode, where there's not really a villain, and there's not really an alien. There's just an alien object. And I think it'd be quite cool if you thought, well, what are some obstacles and things that come up in relationships, blah, 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 throughout the next season. And, you know, they just sort of created alien gizmos that in some way or another facilitated or shed a light on some of those obstacles.
So easy to tie into the unit stuff as well. I think their issue, I reckon, I wouldn't be surprised if Ella and Juno agreed, you know, with a lot of these kind of thoughts here, of what would be really cool episodes to have. Their issue is people like us who are like, we don't even need an alien, you know, in an episode to want it. They're the ones who have to get people listening. And, you know, the BBC has to tweet out something to hook people in week to week. So I think they've got that real issue. You know, they might love to do a super character thing just focused on this kind of stuff, but it's tricky for them to keep, especially if they do get a season 2, to try and keep people engaged and coming into it. Really tricky for their ends. But I think hopefully they would get a better balance of, you know, what new kind of character-y stuff can we do this week that's not just kind of the same stuff, you know, and how can we keep people interested? What kind of stuff can we tweet out? You know, what kind of connection to Who stuff can we do to get people into it? Especially because I feel like the episodes are too much fan-made to me. We're doing stuff that you can't put in the tweet, you know, for engagement. The stuff where, like, we're going to mention, you know, we're going to mention the Green Death, and we're going to mention all the Sarah Jane characters. We're going to mention the Yetis. Like, those are just references, so they don't go in the tweet, but they just kind of pepper in the episode. So I would like a better balance of have your Doctor Who-y stuff in there that connects, like have your monster from wherever, and maybe leave it there and don't have the million other like RTD references along the ride as well. Would be a balance that works better for me, but I don't know.
Oh, I was going to say one other thing we haven't mentioned yet with regard to the where the show could go in the future possibly is the revelation in the the sort of mid-credits scene at the end of the finale that they now have this bizarre creature, the floater, living with them, or is it? I can't remember which of them has it now. Is it Cleo has it?
Yeah, Cleo and her brother.
Oh yes, with her brother. Yeah, and I think that could be quite. I don't know. I suppose he could become a kind of Mr. Smith K9 type alien voice of wisdom plot solver. Sort of, I don't know. That could be fun.
Yeah,
I really dig the idea of them going in a more episodic direction next. You know, Abby's editing an episode of the podcast, and then details of it change as she's editing it, and it like comes alive. And it's her own voice talking back to her.
You could get a bit procedural, have the podcast get a bit more popular, and people can like write in, and that's how you get your episodes of the week.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Someone goes, hey, in Bristol right now, there's a weird thing going on. And so they go and investigate it for the podcast. That's great.
I would love to see the show stretch out for, like however long, doing that kind of stuff, because I think the characters, I like them enough to follow along with that. So that would be good. I'm kind of moving to summing up here. I don't know about you two guys, if you have more to say or not.
I wanted to note that if Redacted does get a second series and they're looking for any young queer writers with an intense knowledge of Doctor Who, you can find me on Twitter.
So another Oliver to include. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, do either of you have final thoughts on the show in the time we have left then?
No, just more or less what you said, which is more please. Keep refining, honing the concept, and I'd love to see more.
Yes, I concur. You're speaking for me.
Yeah, so I think we most of our first hour was pointing out stuff we thought was great about this and about this existing. The diversity in all sorts of regards. The diversity from the paid content of Big Finish, the regional diversity of the characters, and obviously the LGBT diversity of the characters. That's great. Love all of that. I love that it's separate from existing Doctor Who content streams. I think that's great to have that kind of change and new material. It being free, so awesome. Internationally accessible, so awesome. Transcripts, so awesome. Young, fresh writers, awesome. We love seeing spin-offs in off seasons. We wish we saw more of it. That's great. Great that it feels contemporary in multiple ways. It has the current Doctor, and also the characters feel like an interesting update of the kind of Clive type from 2005. I love that it's episodic. Love that so much. However I engaged with it, episodic is great. All that's really good. And the characters feel defined and strong, which is great. So we have all that bedrock and baseline of good stuff. And there's the stuff that didn't work for us so much. A lot of it felt really thematically disparate. I thought the fan wank was way too much. Way too much for me. Pacing issues and how much this series seemed to be spinning its wheels. So frustrating because we like these characters and we like these concepts. And these concepts as well that seem to get raised, and then there's almost a disinterest in how little the concepts seem to really get done, looked into then. Kind of the idiot plot thing with, for so long, the audience knowing more than the characters, and the characters going through the same through misunderstandings again and again. The weird kind of unquestioned similarity to Love and Monsters. Some of the thinness of the resolution. The priorities of the storytelling. I was hoping for more exploration of some of the different concepts that came up. Yeah, so really good baseline. We had a lot of little things that weren't working for us, but the baseline here is really good, and I think it should get a season 2. I really love that it exists. I love the talent behind it. I'd love to see them flourish with the new season and doing new things with these characters. Hopefully it happens. We're absolutely rooting for it, all three of us.
Woo!
Yeah, and so those were our thoughts on Doctor Who Redacted. Listeners, please let us know your thoughts as well. What worked for you in Redacted? Did anything not work for you in Redacted? What would you like to see in a Series 2? Different or the same or otherwise? And or what were your thoughts on our discussion? Things you agreed with, things you disagreed with, things you thought that we didn't say, anything else that comes to mind. We'd love to read any and all of it. And thanks for listening to us as well. Thanks.